Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Kakashi trains Team 7 like ANBU. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Unleashed Reasoning and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. Important Shinobi Lessons. Team 7 had just finished their second exam with Kakashi. He still wasn't really impressed with any of them. He could see their potential, yes, but at the moment they were looking to be terrible shinobi. The idea of them reaching Chunin, let alone Jounin, was laughable, not until they got their crap together. That meant he had to do things differently. It meant he had to do this opposite of what he'd hoped. If he tried it the original way, he'd probably end up with a dead genin or a potential missing min. Hell, it might end up being both. Damn him and his pride. His pride wouldn't let him sit this one out. So, with an internal resigned sigh, he sat down in front of his bickering genin. Alright, listen up. He didn't speak loudly, but the bit of Kai lacing his words got the trio to shut up rather impressively. He really hoped he didn't have to rely on that too often. Congratulations. You passed. They beamed and he quite happily burst their bubble. But you still suck. His eye roved over them flatly. Majorly. Their reactions were predictable and he let them stew a moment before interrupting them before they could build up any steam. Shut up. Kai was liberally used this time as well. It still worked wonders. Kami-sama, when he needed blissful silence, he would abuse this. He already knew he would. I know what all of your flaws are. They're plain as day. And sadly, you won't be able to advance in skill or rank unless you know and overcome them. He looked at all of them pointedly. Did you not learn a single thing during this test? Did you really fail to grasp all I was trying to teach you? His frown went unseen beneath his mask, but his lone eye was sharp with disapproval. I am disappointed. I was really hoping better from you. There were two subtle winces and one large one. He had to bite back another sigh. Naruto, what did I teach you within the first few minutes of our test? Naruto squinted at him, scowl firmly in place. Look underneath. Underneath the underneath, corrected Kakashi. As a ninja, it should be part of your daily mantra to expect everything to have multiple layers of deception. You should never take anything at face value or for granted. He looked meaningfully at his students. Everything. Sasuke looked furious, Naruto instantly became guarded even though his expression and body didn't move, and Sakura looked uneasy. He gave them a small eye smile. That also leads nicely to my second point. Because everything is deceptive, when you take measures to approach and handle them, every action you should take should be overkill. The trio blinked. What? Naruto was the only one who dared speak, but all of them were clearly befuddled. If you have a mission to sneak into an enemy stronghold to steal intel, you should be invisible. Period. Invisible by sight, sound, scent, and chakra. I don't care if it looks so easy that a new academy student could do it, you treat it like it is something so dangerously out of your league it's ridiculous. If you meet an opponent, always treat them as if they are S-rank criminals who would do anything and can do anything to kill you in less than a heartbeat. If you down an opponent, you will once again treat them like an S-rank criminal and do everything even remotely feasible to ensure they are completely incapacitated, be that either by death or binding them for interrogation. He looked at them sharply. Am I clear? But none of them immediately spoke up, has barked it out loudly again. Is that clear? Yes, sensei. Chorused the three genin, startled and a bit alarmed. Good. I smiled. Now, since we've addressed two of my main issues with your misconceptions about being a shinobi, let's focus on the other main one. Deception is the core aspect of shinobi life, period. Understanding this, it means you should all be incorporating it into your daily lives as well. He clapped his hands, making them flinch. So, here's what we're going to do. This, he waved a hand between them, is your only safe zone. When we are safely training and are in a secure area, I will allow you to drop all pretense and be yourselves. Began Naruto, only for Kakashi to cut him off. Everywhere else, you will be putting up a front. He pinned them with a sharp stare. Everywhere. Sakura and Naruto swallowed thickly, while Sasuke shifted slightly uneasily. Kakashi eye smiled again. An example. Look at me. Your first impression of me was rather low, wasn't it? I seemed lazy and inept. Pulling out my book also makes me look like a distracted pervert. The genin looked like they got caught stealing a cookie from the cookie jar. Internally, Kakashi cackled. However, I am a highly skilled and deadly shinobi. I have an impressive mission list and have a nice reward in the bingo book. Misdirection and deception are everything. Even with my bingo book listing, a lot of foes don't take me seriously once they meet me in person. Why? Because of the persona I present. He held out his hands. So, before we do anything further as a team, we're going to break some of your bad habits and start forming new ones. First one, we're a team. We're going to sit here and each one of us is going to reintroduce ourselves. This time, however, we're going to tell our proper histories, including the deep dark secrets no one wants to share. When they looked like protesting, Kakashi blasted them with intense kai. This isn't up for debate. If Kakashi was being honest, he hated this idea as much as his students. It hurt to revisit the past. But he would be damned if they were going to keep playing this game of avoidance and dig themselves into deeper holes than they already were. So, despite his misgivings and the guilt that speared him ruthlessly, Kakashi shared his past. All the nitty-gritty, other than Naruto's parentage, was shared. His father, his team, Obito, everything. He even showed them his Sharingan. He made Sakura go next. He forced her to talk about her being a target for bullies, her reasons for bullying Naruto, and her obsession over Sasuke. He even got a shock to find out she had a weird version of split personality. When she finished, looking quite subdued and embarrassed, Kakashi turned to Sasuke. Sasuke had to be threatened ruthlessly, and only through nearly a literal pulling of teeth, Sasuke began spitting out his past with absolute venom. Kakashi just sat on a hog-tied Sasuke and smiled the entire time, still holding the pair of pliers he had threatened Sasuke with. The other two looked suitably horrified by Sasuke's tragic past and, as expected, threw their lot in with Sasuke when he went after Itachi. Kakashi nipped that in the bud when he asked if they were all that stupid. He pointed out again that deception was everything and that the whole massacre seemed too staged. He told them the first thing they had to do, if they were serious about their quest, was to find out as much of the proper truth as they could and present it to him before he okayed their crusade. Naruto looked ill. Once the pause of budding camaraderie evaporated, he realized that it was his turn. Kakashi felt bone-weary looking at the anger and fear that warred in the boy's eyes, despite the boy trying to squint to hide it. But Kakashi had no mercy. He gave the boy a pointed look and slowly, Naruto spoke in the softest voice any had ever heard him use. As he lay out his past while staring at his hands ripping up the grass before him viciously, Kakashi watched Sasuke and Sakura truly begin to realize how messed up and challenging Naruto's life had been. Naruto still choked up over the Kyuubi. It took him several false starts, but by the end of it, the stunned silence was broken by a shamefaced Sakura and a subtle compassionate-looking Sasuke. In the end, Kakashi had to console his tearful genin and hope that his weird therapy session actually did some good. He did decide that it probably wasn't a good idea to let them go home tonight. Sitting in the silence would get to them. So, he made the night into an impromptu camping lesson. He instructed his team to grab their survival gear and meet him back here in 2 hours. Naruto was the first to question it. Your version or ours of 2 hours? Sakura snickered and Sasuke snorted. Kakashi smiled. Well done. As a reward, it will be your version today. All three looked relieved as they each departed. As he watched their backs, he was gratified to see that they left together, unconsciously sticking close. He would fix that tomorrow and remind them they couldn't do that once they left the training field. But for today, well, today, it felt like a flicker of hope. And, with a genuine hidden smile, Kakashi shunshined to the Hokage's office, so late that he was sure that everyone had already left hours ago, if he was to judge the fact the sun was starting to set. It was the fault of a broken mirror and having to circumvent all the bad luck he would have had if he didn't take proper preventative measures. Training started bright and early the next day. Sasuke, you're currently the most advanced skill-wise. You will be teaching the other two everything you know. Sasuke looked peeved. Why? How is that going to help me? 1. As they grow, you grow. 2. If all three of you don't learn the lesson I set you to, none of you advance to the next. We're a team. We train like it, we live like it. Kakashi smiled. Besides, by teaching them, you will come to understand what you know even better. He chuckled when Sasuke looked ready to protest again. If you don't believe me, prove it. In 1 month, if you haven't gotten any better in your techniques by teaching them, I will let you stop. However, if you're wrong, you fulfill your new role dutifully, without complaint, and you will also go out of your way to learn new things to bring back and teach them. Kakashi ignored Sasuke's irritable scowl and turned to Sakura. You, Sakura, are going to learn and teach the boys about the body. He almost laughed at her look of horror. You are going to study medical scrolls and learn how the body works inside and out. You will bring that knowledge and share it with the team. I want everyone to understand what each muscle group is, the major tendons, main arteries, and pressure points. I want all of you to be able to target any of these at any time. Sasuke will be teaching you how to wield Seiban, Shuriken, and Kunai. Also Sakura, you will teach both your teammates basic first aid. I want you all able to set bones, apply proper splints and bandages, etc. That can save your lives. Kakashi turned to Naruto. The boy looked both excited and nervous, and Kakashi had to resist ruffling his hair. Naruto, you have a unique insight on people. There are a few things you've misunderstood, but overall, you're quite intuitive about people and their emotions. So, I want you to train Sasuke and Sakura about reading people. The better do this, I want you to make a handful of cage bunchen and have them hide in different locations around the village. Their job is to observe people as they go about their business. If someone looks suspicious or interesting, or has an expression you can't identify, have the clone follow them until they can identify it. This is to be a daily occurrence. Every day you wake up, make about 5 to 10 clones and have them hide in the village. You will start with civilians. Your goal is to learn these things while not being caught. As you improve, I will up the challenge to Genin, and then to Chunin, and so on. Naruto frowned. But, how will I know what they do? What if they get caught before they can come tell me what they've learned? Kakashi blinked. You missed the part about memory transfer, didn't you? Memory what? Kakashi sighed. Naruto, one of the second major reasons Kage Bunshin is a forbidden jutsu is because of the fact what a clone learns throughout their existence is transferred back to the creator when the clone is dismissed or destroyed. Meaning, you have a highly useful ability to scout and steal information without ever putting yourself in danger. Naruto's eyes were huge before a determinedly wicked gleam lit in them. Kakashi could swear the boy was silently cackling to himself. It made the older man shudder. Right? He clapped his hands. One last thing. As a team, you're all going to be practicing stealth. In order to do this, I have purchased 3 appropriate uniforms in order to help you improve. Stealth is going to be our biggest area of focus. If the enemy doesn't know you're there, you've pretty much either already won or gotten a huge advantage against them. We'll start with stealth training for now, and after that, Sasuke will take over to train you in the 3 main weapons I mentioned before. He pulled out a scroll and unsealed the uniforms he had spoken about. No way in hell. Naruto burst, looking horrified. Sasuke fully agreed with him, while Sakura simply sneered. Kakashi preened under their reactions. Here you are. One for each of you. He handed them to each of his students and internally cackled as they all acted like he was handing them venomous snakes. Now, hurry up and put them on. We only have so much time before we move on to the next bit of training. He cheerfully clapped his hands in encouragement. It's bright fluorescent pink. Wailed Naruto. No way in hell. Not on your life. Naruto's orange jacket is less of an eyesore. Agreed Sakura. Hey. Protested Naruto. Sasuke merely grunted in agreement, hand twitching with the intent to incinerate the terrible uniform with a great fireball. Kakashi smiled, gleefully dosing them with Kai. Put them on. If you can get the item on this map without getting caught, you pass this lesson. If you get caught, you start from the training ground and do it again until you either get it right or time runs out. He chuckled menacingly as he tossed a scroll at their feet. Oh, and just so you know, you will repeat this lesson until you've reached the proficiency I expect out of you. Sakura looked ill, Sasuke looked murderous, and Naruto looked like someone just stole his freshly prepared ramen. Ah, thought Kakashi, today is looking to be a pretty awesome day too. Ino shrieked. Sasuke. What are you wearing? TCH. Sasuke pivoted sharply and headed back towards training ground 7. Naruto and Sakura didn't dare breath, lest Ino see them as well. Neither wanted the blonde gossip to have such juicy info. They valiantly ignored the fact half the village had probably seen them already, and Ino's gossip would be old news at this rate. When Ino's horrified ranting voice was long since out of range, only then did Naruto and Sakura break their cover and hightail it back to the training grounds. Sasuke would be pissed they hadn't followed immediately, but he wouldn't say anything. He'd done the exact same thing when Sakura had hit Naruto and gotten the 2 of them spotted by a rather beautiful tomato vendor. Damn Kakashi. Well, that was a delightful morning of training. Kakashi smiled at his genin, who glared at him murderously. He didn't care. He happily took pictures of them all day, especially the more comedic times they'd gotten caught. Priceless. Sasuke, you're up. He tossed the raven-haired youth 3 scrolls. This should have all you need. Sasuke huffed but unsealed the kunai first. Grab 10 each. He moved over to the training logs and the straw dummy that Kakashi had set up when they'd been attempting stealth. When Sakura and Naruto stood about 20 paces away, Sasuke pointed to the straw dummy's torso. I remember your counts for throwing kunai from the academy. We'll start there. Aim for the torso. It's the biggest area to hit. Hey. Would you say it like that? Interrupted Naruto. Sasuke barely suppressed a sneer. Because neither of you are good enough yet for more precise throws. Once your aim improves, the target area will change. He moved to stand beside them and gestured Sakura forward. You go first. She took a determined stance, shifted, and threw. She completely missed. Sasuke grit his teeth, counted to 10, and exhaled slowly. You're not flicking your wrist correctly. Do it again. The next 2 hours were a steady grind on Sasuke's patience. Twice he nearly accidentally stabbed his teammates. Maybe make that 3. Day 3, Naruto had a peculiar expression on his face. Kakashi-sensei. Yes Naruto. I'm confused about something. Oh? Kakashi gave him a small head tilt to continue. Well, Naruto scratched his head. I was watching, and well, he grimaced, how come they don't get rejected? Blank stares from the rest of the team. Can you explain further? Naruto frowned. Why aren't they getting hit or turned down when they ask someone else on a date? They just say yes the first time. Kakashi was a little horrified that Naruto truly seemed serious about his question. For a moment he could only stare at the blonde, and both Sakura and Sasuke were doing the same. Naruto. Kakashi grasped for words. Do you know what the difference between a crush and love is? Naruto just tilted his head in confusion. Difference? Aren't they the same? Kakashi really wished Kushina or Minato were here to do this. He really didn't want to have this talk. There's a big difference. A crush is when you admire someone for a few of their traits. You don't really know that person and you are attracted to the idea of them. It is usually superficial. Follow me so far? Naruto frowned. Sorta. Yes, well love is more profound. Kakashi internally winced at the pathetic attempt and Naruto's confused expression only deepened. Love is stronger than a crush, more meaningful. Love is when you deeply care about a person, faults and all. When you love someone, you know they aren't perfect. You know all their hopes, dreams, and biggest fears. But despite all their shortcomings, you still love them completely for being exactly who they are, flaws and all. Love is best when it is reciprocated. A quick glance at Naruto's expression and he clarified, when love is returned equally. Naruto frowned at the grass, visibly turning things over in his head. So when you have a crush, it's more shallow. He grimaced at the wording, but he really couldn't find anything else that fit. And when you love someone, it's deeper. In essence, yes. Kakashi scratched his cheek through his mask, feeling incredibly awkward about this whole topic. So, when you have a crush on someone, it's normal to get rejected. Well, not all the time. Kakashi hummed. Sometimes a crush can develop into love. So it's okay to keep asking so it can turn into love. Kakashi blinked. No, it's not. That only serves to irritate the person being asked and insults them. Naruto looked startled. Insult them? Naruto, if a person rejects you after you ask them on a date, it's very rude to keep pestering them. Not only that, you're insulting them because you're clearly not respecting their feelings. By ignoring their rejection you are being demeaning by implying that your feelings are more important than theirs. Naruto looked like someone just punched him the gut. Kakashi was surprised that Sakura seemed to catch on to the lesson by turning a very unhealthy green color. Sasuke looked like he was trying not to hope too much that Sakura was taking the conversation to heart and wouldn't be pestering him for dates anymore. The raven-haired boy was also looking at him with something akin to hero worship. Such a look did not fit the emo boy's face. It was disturbing and Kakashi wished someone like Kurenai had given Sakura this talk, not him. Kakashi cleared his throat to knock everyone out of their weird funk. Naruto, if you ask someone on a date, only ask once. If they reject you, move on. If they end up changing their mind later down the road, they already know you're interested and can come find you to ask you instead. Understand? Naruto nodded vigorously. Thanks, Kakashi-sensei. Sakura sneezed, startling the poor woman she'd been discreetly following. A rather impressive feat considering Sakura's bright pink attire. Twin groans from either side of her sent the poor civilian screaming down the road about ninja stalking her. Sakura looked sheepishly at Sasuke and Naruto as they shambled out of their respective hiding spots. Sorry. Naruto sighed. We were so close. Sasuke just grunted and started heading back towards the training grounds. Sakura. Naruto shifted uneasily, hands hidden behind his back. She blinked. Both of Naruto's teammates were still a bit surprised that Naruto's natural state of loudness was actually quite soft. His more boisterous personality had, to Kakashi's glee, been a complete and utter front. All of them, Kakashi included, were very happy the blonde was more subdued now when they were training out of sight. It made for a more pleasant atmosphere to focus. I wanted to apologize. I didn't realize I was being rude when I kept asking you out. I'm sorry. He winced. You're amazing and I really wanted a chance to see more of that. He gave her a faint smile. But I got lucky. We're on a team. That's awesome. So as an apology, here. He thrust a potted plant into her startled hands. It's supposed to be good for medicinal purposes. He scratched behind his head. It wasn't quite big enough to give to you last week after I realized how big of an idiot I'd been. The way he said that made her pause. You grew this? He nodded, beaming at her. Yeah. I've had this little guy for a while. He gave it a wistful look. Before the orphanage kicked me out, one of the caretakers made me work in the garden a lot. I really liked it, even though I had to pretend to hate it or he wouldn't have let me do it anymore. Sakura's eyes were suspiciously moist. Thanks, Naruto. Her voice was a little choked up too. She cleared her throat. Maybe instead of you know. She winced, still unable to actually say date to the very boy she'd loathed asking her for the past couple years. Maybe we could be friends instead. His blue eyes widened comically and for the first time, his exuberance wasn't met with a wince as he jumped and fist pumped. Instead, Sakura laughed. Kakashi, standing unobtrusively to the side with Sasuke, smiled beneath his mask. Sasuke felt a weird wiggle in his gut. He wasn't sure what it meant, but it bothered him until Kakashi stole their attention. "Well, why don't you put your new gift somewhere safe, Sakura, and we'll get back to the tree climbing we were doing yesterday." She nodded sharply, dashing to their gathered pile of gear by the memorial stone, using that moment to discreetly wipe at her eyes. Having a friend like Naruto, that would be nice. She smiled softly to herself as she gently fingered one of the leaves of the plant. "Kakashi-sensei." Sasuke's eyes were sharp. "How feasible is it to find a doppelganger for a cat?" His face was covered in quite an impressive display of red angry slashes. The cat carrier chained to the ground was filled with hissing that was randomly interrupted by short yowls. Kakashi winced internally. To be honest, it wouldn't do any good. Why? Sakura and Naruto were hovering a safe distance away from their teammate. The raven-haired boy's Kai was actually a little impressive, and Kakashi preened a bit. The daimyo's wife is not gentle when handling the target. Kakashi's eyes flicked to the glowing eyes in the cat carrier. "You aren't the first to try that trick. The third genin team did it after their first run-in with the beast. However, because of the way the woman and her predecessor handles them, all of the cats end up gaining this vicious notoriety." He shrugged. "Unless you find a way to change her habits, genin will continue to be subjected to returning it to its owner." The boy silently pondered that a moment before he looked up at Kakashi solemnly. "I need my Sharingan." Kakashi blinked. "Pardon? If I can set a permanent layer Jinjutsu, I can change her behavior," the boy said flatly. Kakashi felt his jaw drop open a bit in shock. That was actually a rather brutal but ingenious solution. "Maybe we can accomplish both." Kakashi smiled. "We'll have to find Kurenai. She's the village's leading Jinjutsu mistress." Kakashi grinned. "Also, speaking of illusions, I want each of you to start practicing it by using henge around town until someone dispels it or you run out of chakra." Kakashi performed the technique, turning into a chibi version of himself. "It's a very useful skill, and you should all be more than proficient with it by the time we take any serious missions out of the village." Naruto frowned, squinting at Kakashi a good 10 seconds before something clicked. He gasped sharply and points an accusing finger up where Kakashi's face normally sits. "You are a pervert. This just proves it." Kakashi and his teammates blink at him. "What? If it's just an illusion, when you turn into a kid, you're getting everyone to stare at your crotch," accused Naruto. A full beat of silence followed before a puff of smoke reveals the proper size Kakashi. "Right, new rule. All transformations will be height appropriate." Sasuke smothered a snicker while Sakura looked indecisive whether she wanted to rage at everyone for the oversight or thank Kakashi for the new rule. "Why, what goes where?" squealed Naruto, making a large flock of birds take off from the surrounding area. Kakashi chuckled to himself and turns another page, glad he'd done the underhanded thing and let Sakura ensure that all of his genin knew the birds and the bees bit. He'd have to be extra alert, however. He was pretty sure she was going to try and murder him for it afterwards. 30 minutes later, his predictions proved correct. His genin were all beet red as they shambled into the clearing he'd been waiting for them. Sasuke and Naruto both appear traumatized. However, as soon as Sakura laid eyes on him, Kai bursts from her in an almost terrifying fashion. He actually got nervous. "The jutsu practice," he said a little too swiftly. He clapped and then points at Sasuke. "You and Sakura are going to spar first. I'll walk Naruto through his stances again to make sure he's not slipping out of his new style." He smiled as he quickly guides Naruto away from his other two genin. Sasuke gaped at him in utter betrayal as Sakura let out a threatening snarl seconds before she launched herself at the only available target. "He'll be fine," Kakashi mentally insisted. "Sasuke is the most talented of the three at Taijutsu. Sakura will just give him a better challenge today." He ignored the sound of Sasuke's rather terrified yelp when Sakura audibly break something with an impressive snap behind them. Kakashi quickened his pace, almost bodily shoving Naruto to move faster. "They'll be fine," Kakashi mentally repeated. Sakura shyly handed Sasuke a container. "Tomato salad," she blurted quickly at his wary look. She grimaced. "As an apology for yesterday." She ducked her head. "And for pestering you for dates." She glanced around them. "I know the food here sucks." She wrinkled her nose at the sterile smell of the hospital. Not only had she spent her fair share of time here after Kakashi's more grueling sessions, but he also had her sign up to volunteer 16 hours a week. Sakura was mortified and a bit prideful if she were honest about managing to send Sasuke to the hospital from a taijutsu spar. Kakashi had explained that she'd used her chakra unconsciously to enhance her strength when she'd gotten angry. He also explained that she was going to start new training to improve it, mentioning offhandedly that it was something Tsunade was famous for. Sasuke opened the container and felt an odd warmth when he realized it was indeed a tomato salad with all the ingredients he preferred too. He looked up to find Sakura fidgeting nervously, clearly expecting him to say something nasty. He winced slightly. He was getting better, but he still said mean things without thinking. He was tired of seeing his teammates waiting for his more horrid remarks. It made him feel like he was kicking puppies. He was a little surprised she managed to wiggle the date comment in. He hadn't really expected her to really let go of her infatuation with him. If she stopped pestering him, it would be a massive improvement, but he had valiantly kept the hope of it truly happening from growing too big. He couldn't handle it if said hope was ruthlessly dashed. This was a pleasant change. He knew she wouldn't put any further effort into the apology. The honest regret and self-loathing in her eyes spoke volumes. He also knew she didn't want it to seem like a cop-out, an insincere replication of Naruto's example. She was barely holding herself together, hoping he was as observant as usual and could pick up on the truth and full emotion behind her simple, almost belated apology. Really, there was a lot she was not saying, but the way she was saying it spoke the loudest. He felt a small smile pull at his lips and he couldn't quite force himself to suppress it. He smiled a little more when she met his gaze and saw his response there, and her shoulders visibly relaxed and her smile less forced. "Thanks," he said. He grabbed the supplied chopsticks. "The food here does suck." Sasuke was thankful that Naruto had taught them so much about the subtleties of expressions. He didn't like talking, and he felt better he could express himself just fine this way. It was nice when he didn't have to say anything at all and his teammates still understood him. He was really glad he got put on Team 7. He'd never say it aloud, but he was trying hard to show them without having to. "Hello my cute little genin," cheered Kakashi. As was the norm, his genin stopped whatever personal training they were engaged in while waiting for him. They'd, thankfully, been quick on the uptake. The 2 to 3 hours he was late were to be used for personal training, things he knew they wanted to focus on that they could do on their own. Kakashi-sensei greeted the trio. "Good news. We're going to be working on traps today and the various kinds there are." He grinned wickedly. "To start, you're going to, in essence, prank people." Kakashi wasn't at all surprised that Sakura and Sasuke immediately looked to Naruto. "The trick," Kakashi continued, "is to, of course, have maximum efficiency and effect. It takes subtlety, creativity, and clever application to hit the target you want to and not accidentally catch someone else. This is where we are going to start focusing your talents on your fellow comrades and why we are doing so in the form of pranking. Pranking is basically the safe version of lethal traps." He grinned. "And if you get caught, that means your stealth and evasion skills still need work." His genin grimaced, clearly recalling the bright pink monstrosities they still had to wear. "Also," he said, drawing their attention again, "I have a test for you. If you accomplish it, I'll ask the Hokage for a C-rank mission." Kakashi almost cooed at their adorable looks of eager excitement. "The challenge is to trick one of my fellow jounin." They blinked. "How so?" Naruto asked cautiously. Kakashi shrugged. "If you can pull a fast one on a jounin, with me as witness, and the jounin doesn't catch on, you pass." The three exchanged pensive looks. Sasuke's eyes narrowed in determination. "Deal." Kakashi clapped. "Perfect. Now, let's begin today's lesson." Iruka spluttered as an entire gallon of paint dropped on his head. As he was trying to wipe it from his eyes, a faint hissing noise drew his attention. He froze, turning just in time to see a timed paper tag finish burning, and the air was suddenly full of feathers and glitter. Iruka whirled, righteous anger filling him as he stepped forward to find the culprit, only to hear the very unfortunate sound of a tripwire going off and an unhealthy amount of eggs bombarded him from behind. Iruka was cursing too loudly to hear the faint clicking sound nearby. Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto were trembling with barely contained mirth. Sakura pocketed the camera that they used as proof to show Kakashi their success. All three of them were well aware that the silver-haired jounin would use it gleefully as blackmail when the need arose. He'd already conned someone called Anko into teaching them all about the various types of poisons and how to tell the differences in how they affected the body. It was even more amusing that she clearly wasn't sure if Kakashi had pranked her or if some other jounin did. Naruto was still proud of that one. Kakashi had deemed it too challenging for them yet to target her, and Naruto was bound and determined to prove him wrong. In payment of succeeding, Kakashi had to teach them a new jutsu. Naruto, being as devious as he was with pranks and frightening insightful considering the difficulty of the odd mission, had chosen to prank Anko's favorite food. He'd noticed the pattern when his clones were out and about hidden through the village. Anko always made repeated stops at the dango shop. It was on par with his visits to the Chirakus. Hence, she would let her guard down because she never took the time to check her food. She'd been going there for too long. It was a prime way to target her. This also had the added benefit of creating a paranoia about eating food that they themselves didn't make. Team 7 now consistently and discreetly checked their food for toxins and poisons whenever they ate out. Naruto ended up having to do it a lot more than the other two for obvious reasons. Sasuke tapped his teammates on the shoulder and gestured at his watch. It was time to meet Kakashi. The trio left without Iruka even realizing they'd been there. "Ah, perfect. Kurenai." Kakashi called, waving her over. Said woman paused, turning to look at the silver-haired Jounin. Her team turned with her. Kakashi. Said man smiled. This is perfect timing. One of my students had a wonderful suggestion for a genjutsu and I was hoping that you would be willing to assist. Kurenai couldn't help but lift a single eyebrow as Kakashi and his genin joined her and her team. Kakashi was a weird mystery she still wasn't quite sure how to deal with. This just added to his oddness, for he'd never come to her for anything at all in the past. He was a notorious prodigy, and him asking for help was like expecting hell to freeze over. What did they have in mind? She asked, partially wary. Sasuke. Kakashi nudged the boy. Sasuke grunted, shooting the man a glare before stepping forward. I wanted to know about layering genjutsu and if you can make a genjutsu permanent. Kurenai blinked. That was certainly a loaded request. It took her a second before she started breaking down the concept of genjutsu and explaining the theories of how it worked and the various ways they could be triggered. The pink-haired one looked like she was absorbing everything with a faint glimmer of awe, eyes darting with mortifying consistency to the raven-haired boy she was speaking to. The blonde looked dazed and a bit bored. When Kurenai finally wound down, even though she'd barely scratched the surface of her knowledge, both teams looked equally restless. If genjutsu is all an illusion, began the blonde one, sounding completely confused. Does that make Henja genjutsu too? Kurenai couldn't help smiling a bit, missing the curious flicker of Kakashi's subtle glance at the blonde. No. They are completely different. Genjutsu target people's perceptions, while Henj just puts a bubble of chakra around your body to change your image. They only share one way of disrupting them, and that is to cause a fluctuation in your chakra. That is still confused look, she smiled a bit more. Look, this is a genjutsu. She put her hands together and cast a very simple genjutsu, one that made it look like it was getting dark out already. His teammates broke out of it fairly quickly, but she had to assist him. When he was free of it, he blinked at the bright sky in shock and a bit of awe. She felt her shoulders square a bit in pride. And, if you pay attention, you can see how different the Henj is. She turned into an exact replica of the blonde. Instead of getting the spark of understanding she was expecting, the blonde genin gasped and pointed an accusing finger at where her head actually was supposed to be. You're a pervert. He screamed. Don't come near me. He wailed, scrambling away from her like she was going to suddenly attack him, his antics drawing quite the attention from passers-by. She was absolutely flabbergasted when Sasuke looked equally terrified and backpedaled with the blonde. The pink-haired girl looked absolutely scandalized. And I looked up to you, she spat in disgust. You shouldn't do that to Sasuke. Kakashi looked downright furious. I'm incredibly disappointed in you, Kurenai. Your reputation about hating perverts is well known. It shocks me that it appears it was just a front. Stay away from my genin until you can control yourself. Kurenai and her team gaped at them in absolute stunned disbelief. WHWH, what are you talking about? She gasped at last as she watched him gather his team and begin walking away quickly. He shot her a disgusted look over his shoulder. Henj is an illusion. His eye glanced meaningfully where her head was supposed to be before making a very clearly point to look at her illusion's lower abdomen. Come on team, I'll buy everyone lunch to forget what just happened. As they walked away, the genin trembling in horror, Kurenai felt the mortification of dawning understanding filter through her shock. Her Henj dropped instantly. She felt positively ill. Kiba grunted. I don't get it. What are they going on about? Hinata spluttered, beet red, and ducked into her jacket, inching slightly away from Kurenai. Shino's expression was hidden, but he too took a subtle step away from his mentor. Kurenai just stared at the Inyazuka. She couldn't even form a coherent thought, let alone a verbal sentence. Unbeknownst to her, Team 7 was shaking with barely concealed laughter as they walked out of sight. Kakashi squeezed Naruto's shoulder and shot him a proud smile. That was brilliant, Naruto. I'm very proud of you. His eye roved over his other two genin. And you two were right on K. Well done. He steered them towards the mission office. It seems like I owe you 3 a C rank. Sasuke and Sakura both gave the blonde a discreet fist bump. That had to be the best unplanned prank they'd ever pull. Team 7 rocked. Chapter 2. And everybody wave. Team 7's meeting of their new client, Tazuna, had gone about as Kakashi expected. Team 7's fake personas had worked like a charm, and even the Hokage gave Kakashi an almost imperceptible glance. Kakashi returned the look with a confident eye smile. This only earned him a slightly longer glance. Kakashi could be a royal pain in the ass, which he was totally proud of, but even he didn't mess with Hiruzen too much. It would be bad for his health, really. Hiruzen knew exactly what Team 7 was capable of. Kakashi had given covert reports directly to the aged Hokage, hidden behind heavy silencing seals and shuttered windows. Not even the old man's guard detail were in the room. No one knew what Team 7 was worth but Kakashi and Hiruzen. And Kakashi reveled in it. Shortly after departing from Tazuna, the team met up at their training ground. Kakashi leaned up against a tree. Thoughts? He's lying, Naruto said flatly, crossing his arms. Oh? Sakura. Pushed Kakashi. Sakura rolled her eyes at him. Nervous behavior, eyes avoiding ours and darting down and to the left when we talked about bandits. He was also sweating more profusely than he should be for the mild weather and the lack of exertion, despite the fact he's been drinking for likely most of the day. He pushed too much about our ability to protect him, even if he did buy into our act. The mission is probably higher than a C rank because it probably involves other ninja. Kakashi smiled. Well done. Now, why can't we go back to the Hokage and get it properly ranked and a suitable C rank instead? Naruto huffed. Because the old man already knows there's something going on. Plus, it would look bad if we accused a client of lying without proper proof to back it up. It also wouldn't help our business to turn him down for a supposed C rank. Not to mention we can't afford to send extra ninja on every mission we're suspicious of, both due to finances and manpower. Meaning? The silver-haired Jounin turned to Sasuke. Sasuke's eyes widened slightly. This is a test. It's to see if 1, we notice what's wrong, and 2, if we can handle the unexpected. Bingo. Kakashi grinned. Knowing all that, what are you going to do? Act accordingly, muttered Naruto, squinting towards town as if already mentally running through a supply list. Be more alert, added Sasuke. We're potentially dealing with other ninja that might go up in rank as we progress. Medical supplies, body storage scrolls, proper prisoner bindings, and set up a few plans of attack and defense, finished Sakura. Naruto paused in his mental list. Sensei. If you can summon animals through seals and then hand signs, can you summon people? Naruto scratched his cheek. I mean, if we can, why aren't we just sending prisoners directly to T&I? It would save us a lot of trouble if Kakashi interrupted him with a rather maniacal-sounding cackle. Naruto, have I told you how much I love how your brain works? He smiled at his genin. I have somewhere to be. Meet me here 30 minutes before we're supposed to be at the gate. We'll go through some last-minute checks. It never hurts to have your teammates double-check your supplies. And then he was gone. All 3 genin stared at the dissipating smoke in a long drawn-out silence. I can't decide if I'm excited or terrified by what I just did, Naruto finally confessed. Sasuke grunted. Look at the bright side. We'll have proof who we beat up. Maybe there will be some bounties. Sakura gave them both a devilish grin. Plus, imagine how baffled everyone will be cause we still look completely incompetent. Even if we only send 1 or 2 genin in, we're going to confuse the hell out of everyone. The boys shared a grin. You're late. Slurred Tazuna as he pointed an accusing finger at them. Naruto squinted at him, looking affronted. No, we're not. We totally said 10:30. The drink's going to your head, old man. Tazuna paused, turning a doubtful gaze to the rest of the team. Sakura groaned at Naruto's antics but nodded apologetically. Sasuke grunted in irritation. Kakashi just kept smiling at him. Tazuna shuddered under the Jounin's unflappable stare. Tazuna huffed, pivoting to head out the gates. Fine. Whatever. Let's just get moving. Kakashi discreetly ruffled Naruto's blonde locks while Sasuke and Sakura once again exchanged discreet fist bumps behind the drunk's back. Best team ever, Kakashi thought as he trailed behind his bickering genin. Tazuna came to an unexpected halt in the middle of the trail. Team 7 immediately paused to look at him. Is something wrong? Asked Sakura, having played the role of kind mediator to her insufferable teammates' antics and the client. Tazuna pointed dumbly at the chaotic mess of the trail around them. When he'd last passed this way, it hadn't looked like this at all. Currently, it looked like a rather messy battle had taken place on the rather innocent-looking road. What happened? Team 7 blinked, exchanged looks, and then turned to Kakashi as one. The silver-haired Jounin simply shrugged. I have no idea what you're talking about. It's been this way for a while. No, it wasn't. Roared Tazuna. Kakashi waved a hand airily. Sure it was. We haven't had time to send a team to clean it up yet is all. I came through here 3 days ago. It wasn't like this. Tazuna insisted. Kakashi shook his head. No, I'm pretty sure it was. The Hokage was muttering up a storm about having to put up the money to send a team of genin to fix it. You're wrong. Tazuna, forgetting he was dealing with well-trained killers, stomped right up to Kakashi and started shouting in his face. It was all nice and pretty. Plus, this looks like it just happened this morning. Kakashi gave him a lazy look. Why would you be coming this way? The only way this road goes is to Wave. Exactly. Burst Tazuna. I came from Wave and it wasn't like this. Kakashi's lazy expression snapped into a fierce one instantly. Funny you should say that. Aren't you hiring us to get you safely back to Wave? Why would you come directly from Wave only to hire us to take you right back? That seems rather wasteful, doesn't it? Tazuna's bluster failed him as he gaped under Kakashi's sharp glare. He fidgeted and let out a shaky chuckle. Well, I mean, when I came through here a few weeks ago. Yeah, see, I'm not buying that. Explain. Kakashi stared him down, causing Tazuna to swallow thickly. Tazuna burst like a soap bubble, making a large scene about Gato, his aims to build a bridge to freedom, and how his family would be all alone if he died. Kakashi almost rolled his eye at the man's poor attempts at manipulation. His team was already stuck with the mission. They weren't going to be turning back, nor would they be getting help. But they all had their parts to play. He turned to his genin, making a show of being against continuing. Naruto did his job perfectly, ranting about it being their duty and the right thing to do. Sakura played the unsure card well, and Sasuke's monosyllabic response was icing on the cake. As the team cheerfully continued on their way, Tazuna mingled in with obvious relief. Kakashi glanced back at the crater-pocked road, charred trees, and broken tree limbs. Naruto was terrifying, Kakashi concluded. He'd had the short blonde send out a team of henge clones hours before they were to leave. Naruto had somehow managed to hide explosive notes on each of them. The tricky bastard even made extra clones henge into random objects for his people henge clones to carry, a nifty trick they'd discovered, that as chakra constructs it meant the clones could quite literally bend their shape to the form they wished, so were a properly transformed object, and not an illusion. An unassuming group of 5 had walked this trail, and quite literally an entire army ended up beating the crap out of 2 unsuspecting Chunin. The 2 missing nin were lucky they survived, if barely. Sadly, Kakashi was pretty sure that the 2 Chunin had a friend or 2 nearby. The 2 Chunin Naruto described and Ibiki confirmed were one suspected of working with Zabuza. Ah well, his little genin would learn some valuable stuff on this mission. It would be quite the show. Kakashi sweat dropped. He really hadn't expected Naruto's little trick to work twice. The fact he'd managed to actually injure Zabuza was quite an accomplishment. Bad thing. Zabuza was furious. The singed and clearly battered man came charging down the path in an absolute rage, frothing at the mouth about orange-clad punks, pretending to be ninja. Naruto did not help matters by cackling like a hyena, taunting the eyebrowless bastard for being so pathetic. Kakashi kinda couldn't blame him, but Zabuza's enraged swings of his massive sword were getting a bit harder to dodge or deflect. Tazuna hadn't helped either when he'd shouted "I knew it. You made that mess, didn't you?" and then pointed accusingly at his team. His team did a good job ignoring the civilian. Bad thing. They started taunting the missing nin too. Sasuke even went so far as to tell the man to his face that he wasn't worth the effort if the dope could hit him. The boy crossed his arms and smirked at the older nin. Zabuza became apoplectic, forced into incoherent sputtering as his kai flooded the area. Kakashi was just about to panic that his idiot little genin was about to become a smear on the ground when suddenly Zabuza wasn't standing there anymore. Kakashi blinked. Tazuna blinked. Zabuza's head, sticking out of the dirt in a very familiar fashion, began spouting some very creative and very foul curses. Right until a rather fearsome-looking Sakura came barreling forward with a warcry and smashed a fist in the man's head so hard only his hair was now visible above ground. Naruto appeared from underground, clapping his hands together to remove the dirt from them. Scroll ready. Sasuke walked forward, unfurled a scroll, and bit his thumb. Naruto squawked when he realized Sasuke was already in motion. He performed a swift hand seal before grabbing Zabuza's hair and yanking the man out of his earthly prison. With very little fanfare, Sasuke ran his thumb along the contents of the scroll, which started to glow, before dropping it unceremoniously on top of Zabuza. The unconscious missing nin disappeared in a poof, scroll and all. Just as Kakashi opened his mouth to speak, a despairing cry filled the air as a second ninja came barreling out of the treetops. Feeling a bit put out by being outdone by his own genin, Kakashi reacted swiftly. In a flurry of movement and a subtle lightning jutsu, a masked mist ninja lay on the ground where Zabuza's head used to be. Kakashi recognized a hunter mask and was just about to identify it when Sasuke dropped a second summoning scroll on the unconscious boy and made him disappear too. Kakashi wanted to groan at the political nightmare the boy had probably just incited. Instead, he turned to a flabbergasted bridge builder and cheerfully waved at the path ahead. "It looks like our path is clear. Ready to see your family again?" The silver-haired Jounin would let Hiruzen deal with whatever mess his genin just created back home. Kakashi was happily not present in Leaf to deal with it, after all. That thought put a bounce in his step as he began whistling a jaunty tune, making Naruto complain loudly, Sasuke to glare, and Sakura to wince and try and engage Tazuna in conversation again. None of his team were impressed with Inari. Kakashi willfully let Naruto berate the brat loudly before the blonde happily informed the kid that they'd already gotten rid of 4 big tough ninja already, so no pathetic greedy little worm was going to touch them. In fact, Naruto's mischievous grin should have been ample warning. You could say it's all because he lost his head. Kakashi snorted tea through his mask. Sasuke guffawed before trying to smother his laughter. It made it sound like he was a host of dying animals. Sakura giggled snarkette a lot. Tazuna loudly groaned before taking a rather impressive pull from his drink. "I'm never hiring ninja again. The FT. We did our job. Even when you lied about it." Naruto jabbed an accusatory finger at the old man. "You're here, ain't ya?" Izuna scowled back. "Gato's still out there, ain't he?" Sasuke scoffed, having recovered from his death throes not for long. The long pause followed. Kakashi hummed. "Well, accidents do happen," he remarked blithely. Kakashi tilted his head to the side. He stared a moment before flopping his head to the other side. He scratched his mask jaw. "What exactly did you do?" His genin grinned at the chaos before them. "Nothing much," started Naruto. "Really, we hardly did anything," added Sasuke. "Oh?" asked Kakashi, moving his head aside as a pitchfork flew past. "Yup." Sakura popped the pea as she rocked back and forth on her toes. She giggled. "We only started a riot." All three genin snickered. "You know, for their own good." Indeed, Kakashi watched in fascination as the civilians of Wave tore into Gato and his minions with a bloodthirsty roar. "Ah, so we can honestly tell the Hokage that we didn't lift a finger, yes?" asked Kakashi. Sakura was impressively fiendish as she grinned down at their combined results. "Exactly." Kakashi merely hummed with a lazy nod. He paused. "Whose idea?" "Sasuke's," was Sakura's immediate reply. "I helped refine it so we couldn't get into trouble for interfering with another country's issues. Henja's the best, by the way." Her gaze flickered to him with a cheeky grin before she looked back at the mess they'd created. Her eyes gleamed a bit. Naruto was brilliant. She looked like she might swoon. His vitriol, his verve, his charisma, they were eating out of his palm. She shook herself. "Really, Sasuke and I barely had to do anything to help psych them up. His genin were becoming monsters." Kakashi beamed at them, ruffling each of their heads with affection. They were perfect. Kakashi yelped and barely dodged an entire brace of shuriken. When the onslaught ended, he cautiously poked his head around the doorframe to spot a huffing and puffing Hiruzen, glaring at him murderously. "You are despicable," panted the Hokage. "Do you have any idea how much damned paperwork you've given me?" "Just you?" He growled dangerously, clearly debating about finding out exactly what Team 7 had been up to or if he might continue to try and flay the silver-haired Jounin alive. Ma, it can be that." Hiruzen snarled and pointed to the left. Kakashi staggered, eyes nearly popping from his skull. There, sitting demurely on the floor, were five floor-to-ceiling stacks of papers. Kakashi couldn't help but let out a wee chuckle and look as non-guilty as possible. It really wasn't working. Kakashi wasn't as good at it as his cute little genin. He'd watched them flat out steal from someone, get caught doing it, lie through their teeth about it, and then look so pathetic and innocent that the man totally let them go and gave them more. And they'd done it just because. Kakashi decided he wouldn't admit to the Hokage, which he was ready to do prior to nearly becoming a walking pincushion courtesy of Hiruzen, that the whole mission had seemed anticlimactic, considering how his genin had pretty much owned the whole damn thing start to finish. Instead, all the Jounin managed to get out was "My genin are adorable." Kakashi wisely fled as Hiruzen roared and a hail of kunai followed him out the door. Hiruzen's secretary was pale and shaking, hidden beneath her happily solid metal desk. "I'm quitting. I'm totally quitting. Burchan is a total liar. This place is a kami-forsaken nightmare." Chapter 3. Remedial Lessons. Ouch. Kakashi strolled casually into the training field. It instantly put his cute little genin on high alert. "Who's invading?" Sasuke demanded swiftly. "Are you injured?" Kakashi blinked. Right, he really needed to rely less on Shunshin. He cleared his throat. No one. Or at least, no one today. I have heard rumors though." Sasuke put on his focus face. Really, it just made the kid look broody. Naruto loved to pick at him for it if he did it too long. Kakashi waved him off. "Not now. We'll get to that when it becomes more pertinent." He rolled his shoulders. "I took my time getting here today because I didn't want anyone thinking I had anything to know about why the ANBU headquarters are suddenly a bright fluorescent pink." He paused. "So he gave them all an eye smile." Naruto shrugged. "The minions did it." Kakashi's blink was slow. "Pardon?" "The minions," Sakura repeated. "They're very handy, you know." She gave him a very respectful nod. "I understand now why Jounin enjoy having genin to train. Wonderful use of delegation when you want something done." Sasuke, of all people, was nodding along seriously. "I'm really glad that Naruto decided to share them. We get twice as much done and we have perfect volunteers when we're trying out new rope tricks." Kakashi stared. He counted to 10. He blinked. "Right. Minions." He sighed. "What are you talking about?" Naruto pointed to the side. "Since Iruka-sensei took a B-rank mission to escape all the pranks being pulled on him, the new teach is pretty crappy. We've been keeping these four busy." Kakashi felt his jaw drop a little in surprise. There, wriggling on the ground, completely hog-tied in a very impressive fashion, were four young academy students. He almost guffawed when he saw both the esteemed grandson and the second Hyuga princess. He still sniggered. "How long have they been like that?" Sakura hummed. "About 15 minutes. If they don't get out in 30, we'll untie them and they fail the test for the day. She shrugged. We don't want to injure them by keeping them tied too long. She winced and rubbed her wrists. I still remember how long it took me to get feeling back in my fingers when Sasuke and Naruto got in an argument and forgot I was tied up. She shuddered. Hence, guinea pigs. She shot her two sheepish-looking teammates a dirty look. And I play supervisor. Naruto chuckled and gave her an apologetic look before turning back to their sensei. We convinced the minions to help us on our assigned project. He gave Kakashi a dirty look. Because you intentionally put that darn necklace right next to the ANBU headquarters for our stealth training, I knew we'd never make it unless we got a distraction going. Kakashi felt a tingle run down his spine. You pranked the entire ANBU headquarters as a distraction. He felt a little lightheaded. Sasuke was positively glowing with pride. The minions did well. Had them hinged to hide their identities and then set them loose. They passed the test with flying colors. Sakura cackled. Do you have any idea how amazing it is to give primed paint-filled explosive notes to academy students? She grinned up at him viciously. And how much ANBU ignore people with civilian-sized chakra? More so with children. Naruto rolled his eyes. Yeah, we almost got caught because you were practically squealing about adorable little minions. Sasuke grunted. No kidding. I had to forcibly drag you away or you would still be there cooing over the mess. Sakura huffed and crossed her arms. It was glorious. I wanted good pictures to show sensei. I think 50 pics is overkill, deadpanned Naruto. He shook his head. Anyway, he tossed the item Kakashi had marked on the map. It said Jounin, here. No one saw us. He snickered. We kinda blended in with the headquarters' new paint job. Kakashi stared dumbly at the necklace in his hands. This wasn't supposed to happen for another 6 months. 6. And they did it in 9 weeks. And they broke his rules to do it. Kakashi's eyes burned a little bit and he inhaled sharply through his nose. Well done. He beamed at them. Well done indeed. Sakura simply plopped the photos in his hand in response. Kakashi's forgotten guffaw exploded out of him, making his genin jump into passing Jounin to nearly miss the tree branch he was leaping to. I blinked, looking over his shoulder in stunned shock, having barely fixed his footing in order to not make a close facial encounter with Bark. Guy's eyes got misty as his genin came to a stop alongside him. What is it, Guy-sensei? Lee's head whipped around to see what had brought their boisterous teacher to a halt. An oddly subdued but tender smile flitted across the eccentric man's visage. Tenten and Niji exchanged wary looks. Lee was still squinting into the foliage. It's a bountiful day. Boomed Guy, fist rocketing up into the air and straight through the thick branch above him. He ignored it as it fell loudly to the ground and instead turned a, normal for him, tearful gaze on his genin. It's a wonderful day indeed. We must express our own youth just as vigorously. And then he took off through the trees at a maddening pace. Tenten groaned, Niji grit his teeth, and Lee's eyes sparkled as they all chazzed after their roaring about youth sensei. We are trash. Wailed Team 7 as they groveled at Kakashi's feet. Kakashi stood, arms crossed, scowling at them. What lesson did we learn today? The 3 genin were covered in soot. Naruto's nose was still bleeding a bit, but thankfully Sakura had set it straight again. Sakura herself was sporting a ragged hack job of an impromptu haircut, as well as missing half of her left eyebrow. Sasuke was still smoking a bit and his right arm was resting in a sling. Sakura sniffled, looking up at the silver-haired Jounin with wet eyes. And never leave a teammate behind. And that we are so below your level that it is laughable to a ridiculous degree, added Sasuke, wincing as he bowed low again and pain lanced through his arm. Kakashi's eye turned to the blonde trembling on the left. And you? We didn't know. Burst Naruto, honest to Kami, tears falling down his whiskered cheeks. Kakashi sighed, slouching as his angry visage faded away. What have I been teaching you? You didn't even think before you attacked. Do you have any idea how lucky you are that the Hokage hasn't written us all up for insubordination and dishonorable conduct? His poor genin were so morose that Kakashi didn't have the heart to be too mean. He'd already put them through the ringer anyway. Honestly, we should be super grateful that all he's making you do is perform extra D-rank missions and insists that I ensure you learn proper protocol for entering the Hokage's office. All 3 genin wince. We're sorry, murmured Sakura. Sasuke and Naruto nodded beside her as they all stared glumly at his feet. He sighed again, moving to sit down before them. He ruffled their hair, Sakura being last as she was in the middle. Normally I would be super proud of your excellent reaction time. However, you didn't properly assess the situation before you went ballistic. He cracked a grin. It was, however, quite amusing that Ibiki, of all people, handed me a card applauding you for your amusing and out-of-the-box methods. I swear I heard him snort as he was walking away. Kakashi gazed thoughtfully up at the sky and scratched at his jaw. I don't think anyone else has gotten him to crack like that. His genin gave him small hesitant smiles. I smiled at them. Really, other than the Hokage threatening to skewer me and hang my entrails from the Hokage monument, it was quite a performance. 4 hours earlier, Team 7's genin were excited. They'd just finished another 2D ranks for the day and were impatiently waiting for Kakashi to return from wherever he went. He'd promised them some new sort of training, and though they knew to be wary, they were also pumped about it. Kakashi's methods were unorthodox, but they were impressively effective. Kakashi proofed into the training ground and held up a hand in greeting. Change of plans. The Hokage summoned us. The genin groaned but followed obediently as Kakashi turned to head towards the tower. Any idea what to expect? Asked Sasuke, hands in his pockets as his thoughtful gaze turned closed off and irritable as soon as they crossed over the invisible threshold of their private training ground. Naruto's relaxed gait immediately became bouncy as the blonde practically vibrated in place. Are we getting another C rank? He asked loudly, the overenthusiasm making Sakura wince. Kakashi chuckled. We'll see when we get there. Naruto groaned theatrically as Sakura berated him. The walk always seemed to take forever when they had to pretend like this. It was so much easier when they were all disguised and moved through town with ease. They only had to do this when Kakashi was with them. The rest of the time they pretty much treated like extra training and went almost everywhere under a henge. Their favorite disguise was of 3 civilian kids who had lower working class families and were often left unsupervised. Sasuke had been against it at first. Somehow Sakura had convinced him and Naruto to pretend to be brothers. In a weird twist of fate, Sasuke had to pretend to be the older brother, mostly because he was taller than Naruto, and Kakashi's henge height rule was strictly obeyed. The first 2 weeks of the disguise had been very hard to hold up. Sasuke had so many mixed feelings about Itachi, he wasn't quite sure what to do with himself as an older sibling. It didn't help that Naruto played the younger brother with perfection, always coming to Nai-san for everything. Naruto's Toro-kun act was brilliant. Toro-kun was all gentle sweet smiles and naive wonder. His dark brown hair was adorably mussed and his big brown eyes positively soulful. Sasuke, after much twitching and hidden horror, eventually decided to act like he'd always wished Itachi had. It had, not that Sasuke would ever admit it aloud, but it had been kinda cathartic. It was kind of nice to feel the weight of responsibility over a younger sibling. Sasuke found himself standing straighter, feeling more protective and far more open than he'd been for years. Sakura's Kai-chan was just icing on the cake. She played Toro-kun and Taku-kun's favorite cousin. She was everything that Sakura never got the chance to be. Kai-chan was a loud, almost to the point of obnoxious, tomboy who goaded her cousins into anything and everything she could think of. She was their ringleader and mischief maker. Taku-kun found himself having to be the voice of reason and play mediator when they inevitably got themselves into trouble, which was rather often, really. It was so different to their usual roles, it was like a breath of fresh air. All 3 of them had grown quite a lot because of it, and Sasuke knew he would forever have a soft spot for their little civvy trio as they called it. Sasuke blinked, realizing they were at the base of the tower. When his eyes darted to his team, Kakashi gave him a subtle but knowing smile. Sasuke hunched a little more in on himself to hide the faint upwards lift of his lips. As per Naruto's normal style, as soon as they reached the doors to Hiruzen's office, the blonde barged right in with a boisterous greeting that left Sasuke's ears ringing. Hey old man. Wow. And that is exactly the moment that Team 7 saw 2 very familiar figures standing to the left of Hiruzen's desk. Kakashi hardly shifted, his lazy exterior completely belying the fact he was poised to throw kunai at the 2 figures' jugulars. Before Kakashi could open his mouth to greet the Hokage and indirectly ask what the hell was going on, his cute little genin moved. Mole. Shouted Naruto. Zabuza barely had time to yell a profanity before 2 Narutos. Kakashi had no idea where the second one even came from. He assumed it was another henge clone that Naruto apparently carried around on principle now. Dove forward straight through the floor. Before Kakashi could tell the blonde to stand down, Zabuza was in a familiar predicament where his torso was quite solidly stuck in the floor. Unbeknownst to Kakashi, Zabuza's feet were flailing around quite comically from the ceiling below. Both Ibiki and Shikaku were staring up at Zabuza's and Haku's kicking limbs with bemusement, while 2 Narutos high-fived upside down before barreling out of the conveniently nearby open window. It lasted all of a breath before Sakura and Sasuke charged forward and landed impressive haymakers on the 2 mist ninjas' heads, and their struggling came to a stop. Both unfurled a scroll, bit their thumbs, and ran them across the seals written within. As soon as the scrolls started to glow, both genin dropped them on the missing nin and fake hunter nin before bailing out the window behind Hiruzen's desk. Hiruzen blinked. Kakashi blinked. Ibiki and Shikaku blinked up at them through the holes where the 2 ninja had been. The ANBU hidden in the room snooked as they tried to suppress their laughter as the dreaded demon of the mist got thumped by a couple genin. Kakashi hesitantly cleared his throat. Yo. Hiruzen's wooden desk creaked ominously as the room was flooded with a terrifying amount of Kai. Kakashi, Hiruzen said smoothly. Kakashi started sweating bullets. His cute little genin had left him. They were totally getting a remedial lesson if he survived this. Present time. Kakashi clapped, ignoring his rather tattered-looking uniform, courtesy of Hiruzen. So, that brings up something I wanted to ask. Naruto, the floor. Naruto blinked. Oh, well it's made of clay, right? It's just like using the headhunter jutsu with rock. He shrugged blithely. You just gotta wiggle between any wooden beams if they're there. Naruto could walk through walls. Kakashi had just been given this gift too. Kakashi felt a bit like doing the insane and challenging guy to a contest. Cause Kakashi can walk through walls. None of his genin reacted as Kakashi started cackling madly and the area around him lit up with flashes of lightning and boomed ominously. They were getting used to this kind of reaction when Naruto broke some unwritten ninja rule. Second, Kakashi continued, as if he hadn't just acted like a mad scientist, what was the whole mole thing? All three genin looked at him like he was clearly missing something obvious. It's our attack formation, whack-a-mole, Sakura said carefully. You know, where the mole pops its head up from underground and then you smack it on the head. Sasuke shrugged. It's faster to say mole, though. Conveniently confuses the enemy too, because they think we're talking about a spy. Really sensei, you use it all the time. It's very useful, Naruto finished, nodding sagely. Well, when put that way thought Kakashi. Oh. Naruto thumped a fist into his palm. He then rooted around in his pocket before tossing something to Kakashi. One of my clones decided to take a picture, cause he thought it was prank-worthy. Kakashi was given the awesome blessing of a forever imprinted image of Zabuza's and Haku's legs, dangling from the ceiling in the tower. Kakashi's collection was starting to look quite impressive. Yo. Kakashi held up a hand blandly. Team 7 fell into formation before him immediately. Hey sensei, Sakura shifted uncomfortably. Are we out of the running for the Chunin exams? She blushed a bit when his lone eye turned to her. I mean, after what we did in the Hokage's office, I wasn't sure if we were barred this go-around. She was sporting a rather cute pixie cut. It made her look even younger than usual, especially with her headband still tied up on top her head. She was literally going to get away with murder and it wouldn't have anything to do with the awesome skills he'd been training them in. What makes you think you were in it to begin with? Kakashi asked, sounding faintly amused. Oh. Remarked Naruto, looking a bit ill and a flash of hurt in his eyes that he buried quickly. Sasuke looked like he was stuck between a pout and bitter resignation. Sakura's entire face simply went blank. It was a bit unnerving actually. Kakashi chuckled. Ma, I'm just kidding. I had been thinking about entering you. I smiled. How did you find out they were happening? Sakura and Sasuke immediately pointed to the blonde. He has eyes and ears pretty much everywhere, remarked Sakura. He was so excited about how much he was learning, he makes 24 clones to hide around the village now. She rolled her eyes. 5 of them even have jobs. Kakashi's head tilted a bit as he turned Naruto's oddly bashful expression. Oh. Naruto scuffed the ground with his toe. When they don't know it's me, they people talk. He looked up at Kakashi through his bangs. There was a tinge of suppressed excitement in his bright blue eyes. There's so much I never knew about. Kakashi was never a hugger, but his cute little genin almost made him want to become one. They were too darn adorable. That's great, Naruto. I'm glad you're learning a lot. He paused. Jobs. Naruto's teeth flashed. Yup. It's so cool. One of the jobs, I get to help at a weapons shop. There are some really awesome weapons out there. And learning about the different quality is awesome too. Naruto danced a bit in place, too excited to fully contain his bubbling energy. There's another that I get to work with a glass blower. It's super neat. His grin was megawatt. The other 3 aren't that fun, but honestly it helps me pay for rent. Kakashi winced internally. He'd forgotten that Naruto didn't get the orphan allowance anymore. He'd also forgotten that the complex tended to charge Naruto more than other tenants. The Hokage couldn't step in because, despite his irritation about it, the owner was correct, Naruto's presence had driven a lot of potential tenants away. Charging him extra to cover the difference was something the Hokage couldn't rightfully fight without causing problems. The best he could do was make the extra cost reasonable. That did, however, mean that an orphan in his pre-teens was fighting an uphill battle just to remain financially stable. You started Kakashi, hesitant because he wasn't quite sure how to offer to help. Naruto, miraculously, knew exactly what he was thinking. Those daily observations of people were getting downright scary accurate. Don't worry, Kakashi-sensei. I've been managing my money better. The old lady at the baths helped me, he scratched his head, or rather helped one of my clones. She explained how I should be spending and saving. And, well, because I can use a henge clone to get supplies, costs have been less. He shrugged. I'm doing okay. Kakashi let out a relieved breath. It still bothered him Naruto had to work thrice as hard as his peers to get by, but he was glad the plucky blonde was making it work. Back to your comment on the Chunin exams, the Hokage has been generous enough to still allow me to decide. He smiled at their radiant expressions. However, he warned, that means you're going to have to prove to me you deserve it. He winced. Your escapades with the Inyazuka clan are not helping your case. Sasuke huffed. That's not fair. That's training. Kakashi waved a bored hand. Training generally means you have a goal you're working towards improving. All I've heard is a barrage of complaints about you three breaking and entering without permission. He internally snickered. He'd also heard how effectively that Tsume roughed his genin up before booting them out of the compound. But sensei. We're working on a new seal. We don't have anywhere else to test it. Sakura looked both imploring and frustrated. A new seal? That could be rather dangerous, more so knowing his genin. What are you trying to accomplish? Scent, Sasuke said flatly. When we've been doing our stealth missions, we've noticed the scent away soap isn't reliable. We were trying to find a way to either mask our scent or rid ourselves of it entirely. We got the idea off the chakra suppression seals that you tattooed onto our shoulders. He shrugged. Sakura and Naruto tried to find anything similar by camping out in the library for several weeks while I discreetly asked around. We couldn't find anything. Our next best solution was to try and create a seal of our own. He shuddered. It has proven ineffective so far. Well, what do you have? Sakura touched the seal on the new bracers she started wearing a month ago. Out popped a notebook that looked to be decently full of notes. She flipped through several pages before handing it to the silver-haired jounin. This is where we started. He lifted a questioning eyebrow. Sakura waved him off. We only move on when we finish a previous seal. The ones in there before that were ones you taught us, and we tinkered with a bit to see if we could change or improve them. She shuddered. Naruto's clones test them for us. She gave him a sheepish look. Sometimes the results are hazardous. The new swamp in Training Ground 10. He asked, moving his headband to scan their notes with his Sharingan. And the fire in Training Ground 43, added Sasuke. Naruto sighed. The new cave in the mountain by Training Ground 12. The mess of Training Ground 33. Sakura shuddered. That one, we can't even begin to explain that one. Kakashi let his eyes move from the book to stare at them. Really? Naruto held up his hands hastily. We submitted a portion of our pay to help with repairs. He winced. Discreetly, of course. The old man would be furious if he knew it was us. We made sure no one could connect it with Team 7. Naruto's clones always go unhinged, and when things go badly, the clones leave no trace behind. Sakura shuddered. Sasuke shifted uneasily. It's rather terrifying how frequently they go badly. Kakashi barely refrained from a facepalm. There is a reason there aren't many seal masters. There's also a reason there is usually an experienced mentor on hand. They help keep the bad things from happening. Kakashi audibly sighed. I'm glad you had the foresight to have a clone do the dangerous part. He gave them a look, however. Please refrain from testing things until you either run things by me or a proper seal master. Naruto huffed. Where are we going to find one of those? Jiraiya of the Sannin is one, remarked Kakashi. Sakura sighed. And he's our spy master as well. He'll never be around long enough to supervise half the things we come up with. Kakashi decided he didn't want to know how they knew Jiraiya was a spy master. He closed the book with a soft thump. Tell you what, if your more dangerous stuff looks credible, and that means laying out your concept more thoroughly, I will see if I can get Jiraiya to take a look when he's in the village. He held up the book. For now, please refrain from testing these ideas until I or Jiraiya approve them. I'm not sure our training grounds will survive too much more of this, and I really don't want the Hokage to catch on to where the new additions came from. I smiled. I will, however, try and help with the scent seal. As I've said before, I'm not a master, but I'm no slouch either. We'll see if we can come up with something workable, okay? Before the exams? Queried Sasuke, looking hopeful. Kakashi chuckled. We'll see. He handed the book back to Sakura, who put it back into the seal on her bracer. For now, back to the training I originally wanted to discuss. Team 7 felt a shiver run down their spine at Kakashi's ominous smile. And that is? Dared Naruto. Seduction, Kakashi said cheerfully. All three genin face faulted. It took Kakashi a good 15 minutes to calm his genin down. They were still quite twitchy, but their mumbled growls and threats were subdued enough that Kakashi could continue what he was saying. Now, I know you think I'm out of my mind, but this is rather important. You need to be able to interact positively with a target or a passerby in enemy territory. If you can woo someone, it puts them in a false sense of security. They trust you and are willing to defend you. They are also willing to share more information with someone they are romantically interested in. He gave them a hard look. This isn't a joke. He internally sighed at their disbelieving looks. This is a very traditional and well-used trick as a shinobi. I know we don't talk about it a lot, and that is mostly because you are still quite young, but it is actually still a very useful skill to have. Many of our Chunin and Jounin use this to their advantage. He paused. Some more than others. If we're to take this seriously, growled Sakura, and you already made a point about our age, why are you bringing it up now? She waved a hand at her two male team members. And isn't it traditionally the Kunoichi that do this sort of stuff? Kakashi shook his head. That is a horrible misconception. Male shinobi participate in this art just as frequently as women do. Admittedly, it is a poor gender stereotype that causes issues with both sides, but both are equally adequate and well used. He gives Sakura an apologetic look. The biggest sore spot for most kunoichi is that male shinobi tend to brag a bit louder and openly about such conquests. Kunoichi tend to discuss it only with close friends. Sadly, old traditions and biases color these things as well, and it makes for a muddy topic outside of the shinobi ranks. Civilians just don't understand and don't respect those who do it. The shinobi side understand its usefulness as a tool and use it accordingly, he shrugged. It makes for a sensitive topic, but it isn't one to be dismissed. He ran a hand through his hair. The reason I bring this up now is because of a few reasons. First off, now is a good time to start and begin practicing these things. That way, when it becomes necessary for a mission you have the proper experience and ease to handle it. Secondly, just because you are young, it doesn't mean other shinobi won't try these tricks on you. If you are exposed to this now, you are less susceptible to it from an enemy. Thirdly, shinobi generally tend to live short lives. It is rare for shinobi to reach the Hokage's age. This means you are all going to get exposed to this very soon anyway, more so for Sasuke due to his clan legacy. Kakashi gave them all a flat stare. That is the harsh truth. Squeamish as you may feel about it, this is something all of you need to get used to. They still didn't look happy, but they weren't biting at the bit to stick him with kunai. Sakura's bottom lip was jutting out and she was looking crossly to the side to avoid looking at the rest of her team. I hate that your argument is logically sound. He gave her a faint smile. Trust me, I was in your shoes at one point. I didn't like the idea any better than you do. Naruto's face was all squished up between horror and intrigue. Sasuke looked like he wanted to puke. There is, however, a bit of a twist, remarked Kakashi, drawing their attention. I smiled. You're going to be hinged into the opposite gender and convince someone of your proper gender to date you. What? Came three equal screeches of horror. Kakashi loved being a sensei. Aku gazed intensely at the petite brunette in front of him. He reached out and took her hand, feeling the breeze ruffle his spiky raven locks. Yumi-chan, would you do me the honor of going on a date? Yumi-chan yanked her hand out of his and proceeded to swing it sharply towards his face. Aku yelped and barely managed to jerk back enough to miss being smacked, losing his balance and falling on his rear in the middle of the quiet path they were on. He stared up at the fuming young teen in stunned disbelief. Don't touch me, you creep. She shivered in disgust, wiping her hand on her skirt vigorously. TCH. Stay away from me. She pivoted sharply and stalked away. Aku watched her leave, gaping and frozen where he'd fallen. A giggle drew his attention, and he turned to find a lithe Reed grinning mischievously at him from beside a tree she'd been hidden behind. Her hair was a wild shoulder-length mane that framed her pale face beautifully, and her scuffed yellow shorts and tight yellow t-shirt enhanced her untamable look. You know, that was kinda fun to watch. Aku growled, rising to his feet and dusting off the seat of his trousers. This is ridiculous. Why did she get so angry? The quiet chuckle drew their attention to a smaller raven-haired youth with long silky black hair that brushed the back of her knees. The pale kimono she was wearing made her look both regal and mysterious. Her dark eyes were deep and knowing, and her porcelain skin looked delicate and soft. You are too forceful, Aku-kun. You scared the poor girl. She gave him a small tight-lipped smile before turning to head the opposite direction down the path. You treat the flower too roughly, and it will wilt. Aku gaped at her a breath before he huffed and hurried to fall in step beside her. He stuffed his hands into his pockets with a growl. This whole thing is stupid. Iridide trotted up to the other side of the raven-haired girl with a laugh. I dunno, that was pretty entertaining. You'd think you'd know what a girl would want, you know. She gave him an impish grin. Stuff it, Ray, muttered Aku, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. We shall discuss this in a more comfortable location. The raven-haired girl didn't grace them with a look, merely kept up a steady and graceful gait that made the other two feel like bumbling fools. It was a long wandering path. None of them spoke until they reached a hidden alcove not far from Training Ground 7. As soon as they were hidden in the shadows of the alcove, the small raven-haired girl in the lead was surrounded by a small puff of smoke to reveal a golden blonde head and an easy grin. Aku huffed and disappeared to reveal Sakura's pouting visage. She crossed her arms and gave a dark look at the Reed next to her. Ray gave a cheeky grin and a victory sign before a puff of smoke, and Sasuke was revealed wearing a cocky smirk. Sakura growled, rubbing her temples with irritation. Alright, what the hell went wrong? Chided Sasuke. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. Not here. Sakura shot him a nasty glare before stomping towards their training grounds while muttering a long list of things that sounded rather painful. Sasuke sniffed but followed, hands moving to his pockets. Naruto openly laughed as he dashed ahead. Come on, team. Race ya. Sasuke blinked. Hey. That's cheating, dope. He gave chase immediately. Sakura glanced at them with a scoff. Boys. When they were finally all at the training grounds, huddled in a comfortable little circle, Sasuke pulled out a scroll and unsealed 3 bentos. All 3 gave a cheer before digging in. It wasn't until they were about halfway through their food that Naruto nudged Sakura. What was that back there? You do realize that being that intense scares girls, right? Sakura grumbled something under her breath before looking at him. It's what I always wanted Sasuke to do, she winced, before she gave Sasuke an apologetic look. He looked a bit disturbed that her behavior had been in accordance to what she wanted him to do. Naruto shook his head. That only works if a girl is already head over heels for you. It totally freaks them out if you start that way. He gave her a second nudge. Too fast, too soon. You have to move slower. Sakura groaned. Why? I don't get it. I wanted Sasuke to move that quickly. Sasuke looked more green, glancing at his half-eaten bento before putting it aside. Naruto sighed. No, you didn't. You wanted him to notice you right off the bat, yes. But, Naruto gave her a pointed look, the more he ignored you, the more you wanted him. Had he actually immediately advanced on you, you would have frozen up and probably freaked out like that girl did. He shook his head. It's not romantic until you have an established relationship. Sakura exhaled loudly, slumping with a despondent expression. Then how does this work? She winced. I mean, I know how I approached Sasuke was wrong, but how am I doing things wrong now? Sakura, spoke Sasuke, shifting uneasily under her watery gaze. You want to come across as confident but not overbearing. Sasuke scratched his head. I mean, he shot a pleading look at Naruto. Naruto chuckled softly. Sakura, you can't beat someone into submission. Remember what Kakashi said. Move slower. This isn't a race. He gave her a soft smile. Look, you're approaching this wrong. Instead of being too forward, allow your more shy persona to come forward. She blinked at him. What? Naruto grinned. I know you've got it in you. You want to be confident about you, but when you approach a girl, be a bit shy about it. They like to feel like they make you nervous. It means you find them a little intimidating and attractive. The pink-haired girl opened her mouth, paused, and then let it click closed. Sasuke was nodding to her left. A girl feels pretty when a guy stumbles over himself a bit when he's around her. Boosts her confidence and makes the guy look endearing. Sakura openly gaped at her teammates. How do you even know that? Both boys blinked, exchanged a look, and then shrugged. Well, besides paying attention to it now, being a girl kinda changes your perspective. Sasuke shuddered. Plus, watching a guy stumble all over himself makes you feel kinda powerful, you know? He rolled his eyes. They get worse when you giggle and give them an amused but intrigued response. I had 3 guys start fighting each other just to be the one that got to buy me dango. Sasuke made a face at the sweet treat, tomatoes were always better. He glanced at Naruto. By the way, what took you so long? I thought you were going to meet us an hour ago. Naruto grimaced. Playing mysterious and aloof, for some reason, drew in more guys than I expected. It took forever to ditch them. Oh Himiko-sama. Let me escort you. Himiko-sama, would you like to get something sweet to eat? Naruto groaned and threw his hands up. Himiko. He groused. I swear, I was mobbed. His teammate stared. You're joking. How many? Sasuke had been rather proud of his 3. Naruto pouted, picking at the grass viciously. Dunno, lost count after I tried escaping the first 5. Their numbers just kept growing. He shuddered. I didn't even know we had that many single guys in the village. He sighed. If some pale-eyed dude hadn't stepped in and helped me sneak away, I would have probably been trapped at the market for another 2 hours. Sasuke's and Sakura's jaws dropped. A Hyuga helped you. Naruto leaned away from them and answered cautiously. Yays. Sasuke spit out a curse. Sakura just kept gaping at him. You can't be serious, hissed Sasuke. Those stuck-up pricks wouldn't give a civilian the time of day. Naruto shrugged. Hey, I dunno why he helped. He was way polite though. When I thanked him for escorting me away from the rabble, he bid me a soft you welcome and disappeared. Prove it. Demanded Sasuke. What? Why? Sakura grabbed the blonde's arm. I'm with Sasuke on this. Prove it. BWH how he jerked out of her grasp. I'm not going to go looking for girly-looking pale-eyed dude. Can you imagine how quickly the Hyuga would kick my ass one glance with their freaky eyes and they'd be beating me into the ground? Sasuke huffed and rolled his eyes. That's exactly why we don't believe you. It's true. So prove it. Growled Sasuke. Do you have any idea how bad of an idea that is? Naruto waved his arms dramatically. Seriously. He probably didn't activate his freaky eyes cause I didn't seem threatening. If we run into each other again, it's only a matter of time before he figures it out. I'd be a walking dead man. A sly smirk slid onto Sakura's face. Maybe he already knows. Both boys blinked. What? Sakura buffed her nails. What if he already knows and wants you because he knows? She gave him a devious smirk. I mean, if he's a girly dude, maybe he likes other guys. Naruto paled a bit. I'm not interested. He squeaked out shrilly. Sasuke broke into loud guffaws. No. Sakura said lightly. No. Naruto said vehemently. It's cool if he's into that, but I ain't. Sakura giggled. Relax, Ruto. I'm just teasing. Naruto's cheeks were scarlet as he blew a raspberry at her before looking away in a huff. I still want proof, Sasuke interjected. Naruto shot him a dirty look. What do you expect me to do? Wander around town until he finds me? Sasuke and Sakura exchanged looks. Sure. Naruto groaned. Yo. Kakashi greeted, smiling at his genin. Save me, Kakashi-sensei. Wailed Naruto as he lunged at the silver-haired jounin and wrapped his legs in a tight hug. Kakashi glanced at the blonde before turning to his grinning teammates. Do I want to know? Sasuke's grin grew. You're the one who assigned the training. Kakashi tilted his head to the side. Sakura waved an airy hand. We're just getting him to prove he met his goal. Lies. Shouted the blonde at Kakashi's feet. If you want proof, you have to have it too. Done, Sakura said cheerfully. Naruto blinked, stared and then scowled petulantly. You all suck. Sakura flashed a victory sign. Sasuke grinned. Kakashi was pretty sure he needed to be there for this with a camera. Tomorrow. He posed. Tomorrow. Cheered Sakura and Sasuke. Naruto grumbled and pouted. Chapter 4. Chunin exams. A can of worms. Kakashi breathed in deep and smiled beneath his mask. He glanced at 3 innocent-looking slips of paper in his hand. At first, when he'd been told he was taking on these 3 potential genin, he was certain it was doomed to failure. If it was any reflection of his team, or heck, even Hirazen's genin team, it was inevitable that things went badly. All but Kakashi was dead from his team. The 3 Sannin had all bailed Leaf in some fashion or another, one becoming one of Leaf's number 1 traitor. Kakashi still wasn't sure if he counted Itachi, hence Orochimaru still held the title. Really, as soon as he started shadowing his possible genin team, he'd been horrified. They were all prepped and primed to become the next great disaster. Kakashi had gone to the memorial stone the day before the genin were to be picked up. He'd stared at it long and hard, eyes automatically picking out familiar names. His team, of course, always stood out the most. It was there that day he took in those names with determination. The guilt was still there, but it was thrust under a wash of anger, said anger directed at how horrible and tragic the shinobi lifestyle really was. He had known the rules backwards and forwards. And, those same rules, had failed him most spectacularly. His genin wouldn't fall fate to the same terrible ends. He knew that they would somehow pass. Yes, he'd had promising genin in the past, but they weren't like these 3. Kakashi had watched all 3 potentials just long enough to realize that they weren't to be underestimated. Naruto's upbeat chipper attitude reminded him of Obito, but there was something in the boy's eyes that Obito's never held. Obito was definitely discriminated against by his clan, but Naruto had suffered the discrimination of the whole village entirely by himself. Sakura was not as dedicated as Rin, but Sakura came from a civilian family. She had yet to fully grasp what being a ninja was all about. That she'd passed the genin's first test showed promise. Sasuke was simply a ticking time bomb. He had the potential. He had the drive. He didn't, however, have the heart. He was so eerily like Kakashi at that age, it made the silver-haired jounin a little sick to the stomach. Kakashi had originally thought that maybe taking things slow, pushing teamwork in more roundabout ways would work. He was hoping that the 3 would be quick and mature enough to realize what he was trying to imply. He hoped they would grow closer like he and his team right up until Kakashi realized that his team hadn't really gotten as close-knit as Kakashi had started imagining they'd been. It was easy to pretend that his team had been closer than they were after they were already gone. Survivor's guilt did weird things to a person. If Kakashi was being honest, and he had to be brutally honest for the sake of his potential genin and their lives, Kakashi had been attached to his teammates, but it hadn't been until tragedy struck that Kakashi pulled his head out of his ass and really noticed his teammates. And, of course, by then it was too late. Watching his potential genin the week before the first test, heck even during said test, reinforced how poorly his original plan would go. There were too many ingrained habits, too many hurt feelings. His genin would fall right back into old habits the moment they weren't under the grind. He was even sure, with this trio, it would take many tragedies, not just one, for the lesson to really sink in. Kakashi couldn't afford for it to go that way. He refused to let it. He might agree that hard lessons tend to stick a bit better, but it wasn't his preference, not when it came to a lesson where lives were to be taken for said lesson to be learned. For a moment, Kakashi's shoulders sagged. Staring at their proud faces after they'd passed his bell test, it was the last stone in the bucket. He watched as that pride started to twist and the sense of camaraderie started to fade from their expressions. They were coming undone right before his eyes. He wasn't foolish. He knew you don't fix old habits and long-standing problems in one afternoon. But the fact it hadn't even lasted long enough for them to agree to grab a bite to eat afterwards was telling. Sakura was immediately ready to conquer Naruto and swoon over a closed-off arrogant Sasuke. Naruto simply didn't understand enough to help things along. He knew the boy understood the lesson best, but the poor blonde just didn't have enough exposure to good socialization to really make any sort of positive influence on his teammates. So Kakashi went with Plan B. Kakashi had never been more relieved or happy that Plan B was so effective. His adorable genin were a force to be reckoned with. Even better, only a handful of people knew that his genin were little monsters. Everyone else was gloriously oblivious. Icing on top. Kakashi was so involved with his current genin team, he didn't while away hours at the memorial stone for one's long dead. He still religiously visited, but he didn't waste hours there. He had too many things to do, plans to prepare, training to supervise. All in all, things were definitely looking up. Kakashi felt his shoulders square and his chin lift. He placed a hand on the cold memorial stone. You'd love them. You really would. A faint depreciating smirk crossed his lips. I'm not quite so hopeless anymore. His eye was a little watery as he sighed and looked up at the blue sky. They are going to do big things and most people won't even realize it. Kakashi sensei called a voice in the distance behind him. Kakashi inhaled sharply, closing his eye and collecting himself before slowly turning to see his genin trotting up to him with open warm smiles. Damn, he really did do something good. And then this boy with a gourd made of sand on his back showed up and Sakura, wait, Naruto interrupted. She paused, glanced at him, and then her mouth clicked closed. She gave him a questioning look. Sorry, it's just, I realized why I felt so odd around him. I'm pretty sure he's like me. Sasuke's eyes widened immediately. He's Jinchuriki. Kakashi's lone eye immediately sharpened. How sure are you? Pretty sure. All the signs are there. Weird nasty feeling chakra feared by his teammates and his eyes. Naruto sighed softly. His eyes are like mine. There's pain there, loneliness. He's totally had to deal with the same crap I had to growing up, maybe even worse. Naruto shrugged. I can't say with certainty, but I would suggest looking into it. More so because it looks like the kid hasn't slept in ages. He's probably a bit unstable and should have his seal checked. Kakashi sighed. Well, it seems like those rumors are pertinent now. All three genin perked up. Invasion. Prodded Sasuke. Really? Kakashi waved his genin to take a seat. This isn't something we're supposed to be discussing with our genin. Only select Chunin know, and there are even some jounin who don't know. It's been pretty closely guarded because we can't afford to lose our advantage by letting information leak. He gave them all a sharp look to quell any rising questions. Suna has been more aggressive of late. Jiraiya has sent word that their daimyo has been assigning missions to other villages. That means Suna is hurting financially right now. They would benefit from being involved in new alliances. He shook his head. There is a new ninja village called Sound. There is a lot of suspicion about the place and a lot of nasty rumors. Some of those rumors include Orochimaru being linked to the new village, even if there is no credible information on exactly how involved he is. He gave Sasuke a pointed look. Jiraiya also said the Snake Sannin has an unhealthy obsession with the Uchiha. Considering the man wants to gather any and all knowledge for his own gain, it wouldn't surprise me if he was after your eyes. He has a well-established record of trying to transfer Kekkei Genkai to new hosts outside said bloodline. It means you three need to be especially wary. If you ever come across him, run. He gave them all a hard look. I'm not joking about this. He is a Sannin for a reason. If you encounter him, don't stand around to gather information. It isn't worth it. Just run. His genin obediently nodded. Good. He ran a hand through his silver hair. Now, good news. The third doesn't think anyone is foolish enough to attack during the first two stages of the Chunin exams. There isn't enough public eye on those two events. It isn't until the third event that every eye in the elemental nations is focused on potential Chunin and their talents. If anything is going to happen, it will be during the third event. That means we have time to set up some safeguards and put together some good strategies to deal with the fallout. Don't we want to prevent it from happening at all? Asked Sakura. Why would we let them just attack? Kakashi shook his head. We can't retaliate against forces that large without a good understanding of numbers and location. The only feasible answer would be assassination. He held up a warning finger. However, because of the timing, it would be too suspicious that their leaders were killed within a month of an invasion. They'd assume it was us, even if it wasn't. They would retaliate and it would still end up in an all-out assault. With all nations and shinobi villages, it's best if it's a very public event. An attacking village needs to be seen absolutely destroying an enemy village or nation. It ups their standing politically and makes them more of a threat physically. Right now, the Leaf looks like a reasonably easy target. We seem complacent and weak despite our renown saying otherwise, more so with our more tight-knit team-oriented practices. That we work so closely with our civilian council doesn't look good to other shinobi nations either, even if it is the very reason we are doing so well financially without any wars going on. Suu began Sakura. Are we to keep an eye out for suspicious behavior? If we see anything, how do you want us reporting it? You are to be on high alert at all times, he said bluntly. I know I tell you to keep on your toes all the time, but this is a step up from that. It is an unhappy truth that we are harboring spies for other nations. No security plan or system is perfect. Good news, the ones we have identified are being watched closely. The ones we don't are the real threat. Your masks are your most important tool right now. You cannot, I repeat, cannot let anyone realize that they're fake. It is the only way you'll be able to gather any reasonable intel, and it will also be the only reason you might survive a bad encounter. If an enemy underestimates you, it means you have one chance to either kill them or get the hell away from them. He stared at them for a solid minute, impressing upon them how serious about this he was. Naruto cleared his throat. Do you want us to use the T&I scrolls? Kakashi paused. Only if you're over 50% certain you have a spire enemy on your hands. Any less certainty could crowd our prison and leave us no room to add actual threats. If you do use the scroll, try writing a note for Ibiki. He hummed. Also, try to be discreet when using them. We don't need to alert anyone, nor do we want anyone knowing our new little trick. And the Jinchuriki? Asked Sasuke. I will talk with the Hokage. He may have a suppression sealing solution from previous encounters with unstable Jinchuriki. He gave them an eye smile when he saw their disbelieving looks. Don't forget, Jinchuriki have been around for a while. This generation is not the first to suffer that curse, and most likely it won't be the last. The three young genin exchanged uneasy looks at that. Ah. The silver-haired Jounin clapped his hands together. That reminds me. Very big note here, so pay attention. He gave them a long stern look. Zabuza and his apprentice are to be left untouched. What? Blurted the genin. Kakashi suppressed a chuckle at their looks of horror. Despite the fact Zabuza is a missing nin, he is on probation. Hiruzen has managed to convince him to ally with us. If Leaf proves as strong as rumor has it, he and his apprentice will be worked into the program. Kakashi shrugged. Honestly, I'm just as uneasy about this as you. However, because you guys did so well trouncing him twice, might I add, he's bound and determined to see, and I quote, what the hell you tree huggers are feeding your kami damn genin. Kakashi snickered. You three left quite an impression. His genin grinned. The Jounin stood, dusting off his pants. Now, last on the agenda. He pulled out the 3 slips of paper. These are. A loud squeal tore through the air, and Kakashi's hand was oddly bereft of any paper. He blinked at his hand before looking up to find Sakura standing next to her teammates with said paper in hand. I didn't realize she could move that fast, Kakashi mused, dazed that his female student seemed to have miraculously teleported twice just to grab the acceptance lips to coo over. It seems you are quite aware that I am giving you permission to enter the exams, he remarked blandly, giving her a flat look. She gave him a sheepish glance, but proceeded to tumble right into an intense discussion with her teammates on plans for the exams, throwing out a rather impressive number of facts and information from previous exams. Kakashi shook his head and chuckled. They were just too adorable. Remember, whispered Sakura as they moved down the hall towards the first exam, avoid Guy-sensei's team. Lee seems like the kind of person to challenge Sasuke to a fight, and an outright challenge like that can't he turn down, or our masks are threatened. Sasuke grunted in acknowledgement. They really couldn't afford to be distracted. Lee's challenge would usually pose a wonderful cover for their masks if someone started doubting his arrogance and Naruto's irritation that he wasn't being taken just as seriously. Sakura could use the window to coo and squeal over Sasuke. But the exams weren't the only thing they had to worry about. Unfortunately, they ran into their first obstacle in the form of a very crowded room where Lee and his teammates were trying to get past 2 other genin blocking some doors. Sasuke rolled his eyes with a huff. They could try and skirt around, but if anyone saw them, they would wonder why Sasuke wasn't being cocky. More so if any of the gathered genin realized it was the first little test to the exams. Naruto grinned and murmured to them. Break the illusion or distraction. Breaking it means more idiots we have to deal with, hissed Sasuke. His scowl deepened. Distraction. The nearby genin was shouting with the rest to let them pass. A discreet hinge later, Naruto sidled up behind him, unnoticed. Sakura and Sasuke watched with hidden amusement as one of Naruto's hidden clones dropped to the floor as a piece of orange ribbon before unfurling into some bland-looking girl with a Suna headband. She moved behind the teammate of the genin Naruto was hovering by. Come on. Let us through. We're going to be late. The unknown genin shouted. He shook his fist at the genin in front of the door. Yeah. Let us through. Bellowed a hinged Naruto, his sound headband flashing as he shifted closer to the genin in front of him. Shut up you brats. You have no idea what you're in for. Roared one of the door guards. Oh yeah? Challenged the genin in front of Naruto, along with several others. Say that to my face. Naruto's hinged face twisted into a wide and wicked grin before it morphed into a furious scowl. Let's get him. He boomed and proceeded to pick up the genin before him and toss him straight towards the genin at the doors. His clone followed a breath later by tossing the poor airborne genin's teammate. Get him. Mistaking it as an actual attack, the entire room took one split-second pause before the entire place broke out into pandemonium. Sakura and Sasuke dove right in behind Naruto, fists swinging while discreetly weaving through the mad brawl and to the staircase to continue up to the third floor. It was barely any time at all before they were exiting the stairs and standing by the actual entrance to the first exams, happily having avoided Guy's genin team in the process. Sakura swore she'd gotten a glimpse of Tenten furiously berating Lee for the pile of unconscious genin on the floor behind him as he sheepishly ducked his head. Kakashi poofed into existence before them with a wide cheerful grin. You know, the fighting usually starts in the second part of the exam. Sasuke smirked. Then they're not doing it right. Naruto and Sakura snickered. Kakashi beamed at them. I'd wish you luck, but he shrugged blithely. Bye. He raised a hand and gave them an eye smile before shunshing away. Naruto glanced at his teammates before grinning widely and barging right into the exam room with a loud bang. Inoichi was sitting in tea and I sipping tea. With Ibiki running the first exam, they'd called the blonde in to run things until Ibiki was able to return. Inoichi really didn't mind. While he knew there was the threat of an invasion going on, he figured it wouldn't really get interesting for another week or so. It meant he had a pretty relaxed day to enjoy while getting paid to do it. Hence, he wasn't expecting the alarm seal to flare that a new resident was in their special seal cell. He had given Ibiki a flat look when the man had thusly named it that. Inoichi sighed, pushing his chair back and summoning a couple nearby ANBU in training. It was a rather useful way to see which potential ANBU could handle T&I in the field and also taught them how to properly handle captured nin needed alive for info. When they arrived, inside was an impressively bound, gagged, and unconscious leaf genin. Inoichi was a little startled to see the large lump on the silver-haired genin's head already shrinking and the genin starting to stir. Inoichi moved without thinking, striking the genin precisely in the back of the neck with a sebum needle. The genin went limp. Inoichi was about to give orders to the ANBU in training when he noticed a folded slip of paper and an odd stack of blank cards tied to the outside back of the genin's belt. Inoichi cautiously opened the cell to peer better at the kanji on the paper. He blanched, whipping around to the black-clothed figures behind him. Get the third. When the ANBU hesitated, obviously doubting the threat of a downed genin, Inoichi growled at him. Now. The ANBU flinched before disappearing in a shunshin. Anko strolled in whistling a jaunty tune. Hey Inoichi. She grinned widely at him. I saw the alarm. Do we have a new toy to play with? He gave her a flat look. You are supposed to be preparing for the second exam. I had that prepped ages ago, she said, waving a hand airily. And I have other grunts setting up the scroll booth and readying the waivers. She grinned wickedly. So? What do we have? Inoichi glanced at the genin, grabbed the deck of cards and the note, and exiting the cell. He locked it, double-checking it to ensure it was locked, before waving her to follow him to a secure room lined with privacy seals. She followed with a frown, more subdued due to his displeased scowl. He sat down and waved the ANBU in training to stand guard outside the door. What's this about? You look like someone took a piss on your flowers in your shop. Anko pulled up a seat next to him. He sighed, setting the cards down before handing her the slip of paper. She glanced at it before she did a double take. What the, she hissed. The paper had only a name written on it and a small little drawn marking. The name was Mizuki and the mark was the swirl that Naruto notoriously wore on his clothing. Anko swore impressively as Hiruzen appeared in the doorway. Ibiki already knew to keep an eye on Team 7. Kakashi's subtle hints early on had been laughable at first, but when the demon brothers had popped into one of their newly designed holding cells, Ibiki made a mental note to inquire more later. The next morning he'd finished informing Kakashi and Hiruzen of his findings when he paused and gave both men a long look. He didn't have to say anything aloud, but he made it very clear in the silence that followed that he was keeping an eye on the new Team 7. Kakashi had the gall to eye smile at him. Or maybe it was a wink. Sometimes, Ibiki wasn't sure with his fellow jounin. Kakashi would wink, even if he was the only one who knew it, just to get some twisted entertainment out of it. Ibiki had suffered a very irritable 4-hour session on Kakashi's asinine reasons he was hours late to everything. This was on top of the 2.5 hours late the man had taken to show up to give said explanation. Ibiki held a grudge against Hiruzen for dooming him to that torture, which he totally took like a man, and was downright giddy with the idea of sticking it to Kakashi at the opportune moment. He also knew never to question Hiruzen about Kakashi's peculiar habits ever again. All he needed to know was that Kakashi was a damn fine shinobi and that the silver-haired jounin's records were humblingly impressive. Bastard, thought Ibiki, eyes roving to the back where a head of familiar pink hair sat. He almost sighed, having hoped that Kakashi would never have the chance to corrupt the next generation with his off-brand habits. Ibiki had been silently relieved that the silver-haired Jounin had failed so many potential genin teams in the past. Clearly, it had saved the village years of mental and physical turmoil. And then Team 7 was born. Kakashi's insanity had clearly borne fruit, as the brats had done the unthinkable. They'd sent Zabuza, demon of the mist to T and Ibiki, and Inoichi had been gobsmacked. The brats looked like incompetent, selfish, whiny little ingrates. But clearly, they weren't. It could be argued that Kakashi did all the work, but Ibiki was an expert at reading people. Damn bastard was too smug for it to be his own work. Kakashi was completely cool and lazy about his own accomplishments, but it would be a fool that missed the pride the man had for his genins. Ibiki was about to look away from the pink-haired banshee when he found his neck muscles bulging, as he had to force himself not to whip his head back around in her direction. Slowly, so as not to reveal his growing ire, Ibiki's eyes once more landed on the lone female of Team 7. She was folding his kami dam test into a paper crane. She was making honest to kami chirping noises as she made it fly. Ibiki felt his pulse leap in anger, barely keeping from cutting into the little demoness with biting fervor. Instead, he inhaled slowly, forcing his gaze away from the brat and over to smoke. Ibiki blinked. Sasuke was scowling at his test, his half-burned to a crisp test. He was pinching the bottom corner and holding the bottom half aloft, the rest a pile of ash on the table. From what Ibiki could make out, it looked like the little shit had been attempting some warped elemental chakra control exercise to write his damned answers. There were marks burnt into the tabletop. Ibiki barely felt his eye twitch. His muscles were straining so much that he looked twice as intimidating as he did when the test started. He was also subtly leaking Kai, adding to the foreboding atmosphere. Genin in the front row were about to piss themselves as they cowered from his fierce visage. Old but a mop of blonde unruly locks. Ibiki found his gaze automatically turning to the last genin member of Team 7 with dread. Naruto was humming. It was some cheerful upbeat ditty of a normally slow and depressing song. And he was drawing on the test, doodling all over the— Wait, that wasn't doodling. Those were seals. Ibiki's anger left in one fell swoop as sudden unadulterated fear coursed through him. Before Ibiki could do any more than part his lips, Naruto winked at the Hyuga girl sitting next to him and activated the seals. The harmless-looking test disappeared in a blinding flash of light and an intimidating wash of chakra. The room lit up with pained alarmed screams. As everyone was blinking the spots out of their eyes, Naruto calmly stood, grabbed some dude's paper that looked full, and sat back down, before continuing to hum happily. No one actually witnessed him do it either. Other than Ibiki and that little Hyuga, knew it was the little bastard to begin with. Ibiki knew the blonde had a test, it had gone up in a ball of light, and now a completely filled-out test replaced it. Ibiki honestly didn't know if he wanted to throttle Team 7 or promote them on the spot. He promptly decided it would be prudent to let the other villages genin suffer Team 7's special brand of insanity. If anyone had the harebrained idea to invade Leaf, Team 7 would give them second thoughts. Hell, they gave Ibiki second thoughts. The bold Jounin barely refrained from groaning and rubbing his temple to ease his growing migraine. Don't get him wrong, their work was fun to observe right up until you had to deal with the cleanup. As if to further goad the poor Jounin, Naruto started ripping up the edges of his test to use as ammo as he started firing spitwads at random genin. Impressively, not any of the genin, but the two Hyuga in the group saw him doing it. Ibiki decided then and there that he would retire before these three monsters made it to Jounin. Period. He refused to deal with them when they reached that level. He would rather sit back and laugh as his replacement had to deal with their chaotic messes. The couple of Chunin in the room seemed to be harboring similar thoughts, if the dawning horror crossing their faces was any indication. Ibiki was 99% sure it was. Chapter 5. Ibiki's Bane. Ibiki was less than impressed. His scowl was rather fierce, and several of the genin in the room were shooting him nervous looks. They had passed. Ibiki wasn't really surprised, not with the trio of horrors in their midst. The damned blonde idiot had somehow dumped liquid courage down their spines right when Ibiki had them about to scatter like cockroaches. And the little bastard was proud of himself for it. It was clear Naruto had mostly done it for the shy Hyuga next to him that looked ready to raise her hand. The rest of his reasons had to be some convoluted BS that Kakashi had some heavy influence in. Ibiki was good at his job. He took the unexpected smack to his pride rather well. No one was the wiser that he wanted to punt the little punk and his team out the window. Right up until Anko was late. Really, he'd expected her to be early and cause a scene upon entering. Instead, there was nothing but awkward silence and the random sound of someone clearing their throat and subtle shifting of cloth. The genin were staring up at him uncertainly and he had no actual reasons why they were all still sitting there. He wasn't about to offer fake explanations or foolish platitudes. They were ninja, damn it. They could handle a few minutes of waiting. Other than it had been more than a few minutes. It was more like an hour. It was Kakashi's fault. Somehow, someway, it was Kakashi and his little monsters. Ibiki was sure of it. He flashed the three a discreet dirty look on principle. Two looked up at him innocently, while the third looked like he was mentally trying to perform lobotomy with a dull kunai on Ibiki's already heavily scarred head. Sad thing was, the genin were all still wound up from his test, even after an hour of waiting. With Team 7 still present, the third would kill him if he left them all unsupervised. There was no telling what kind of chaos would result from his absence. The Chunin were also still present, and Ibiki refused to let them leave either. If he had to suffer, they did too. Besides, he, in no way shape or form, would ever admit he had no idea what was going on. It was his damn job to know what was going on. And he didn't. This had to be the worst day of his career. The Tetsu poofed into the room. The second part of the exam would take place tomorrow. He set a stack of papers on the desk in front of him. Take one as you leave. They have the location and times you are expected to be present for the second exam. After you have a sheet, you are free for the day. Please be aware that any violent behavior towards other ninja or civilians during this period will be an automatic failure and you and your team will be sent home. The Tetsu stood next to Ibiki as a member of each genin team shuffled forward to grab a paper. Naruto leapt right over his desk and was the first to grab one before rocketing out of the room while calling for his teammates in a loud boisterous voice. Team 7 was the first out of the room. None of the higher-ranked ninja reacted, but a few genin grumbled or rolled their eyes at the blonde's wild behavior. It felt like ages before the last of the genin left the room. The Chunin started filing out as well. Ibiki merely gave Katetsu a look, pinning the poor man to the floor until they were finally left alone in the room. Enko? The Tetsu shifted uneasily. Something came up. I wasn't told the details. She's been held up at T&I. Katetsu shrugged. I was told to get these forms ready. He gestured to what was left of the stack of papers he'd brought and inform everyone the next part of the exams would start tomorrow. Ibiki scowled. This was a very unexpected delay. That meant something big had occurred. Ibiki bit back a groan. One day, he's gone one day and everything hits the fan. This was why he never requested time off. All the important stuff happened when he wasn't around to deal with it. Ibiki gave the Chunin a sharp nod before striding solemnly from the room. After all, Ibiki didn't hurry for trifle reasons. Invasion or not, Ibiki had an image to uphold. Naruto, Sakura and Sasuke were hidden in the little bunker they'd created a little back from and beneath the memorial stone. It was 15 feet underground, with a hidden air pipe that the open end remained tucked behind the stone unseen. There was no actual door. Instead, they had created 4 walls and a ceiling from stone and left the floor as clay. It worked perfectly as a substitute door for their headhunter jutsu. As the clay was easier to move through than stone, it worked wonderfully so that even Sakura didn't have a hard time accessing the small 8x8 room. All 3 of them rather loved that jutsu. It was ridiculously handy. They were deep enough underground that any noise they made wouldn't really be heard, even if they were yelling. The pipe also had a very complicated paper seal wrapped securely around the end inside of the bunker, thanks to bugging Kakashi. It was to prevent any sound from exiting the pipe but allowed sound from outside to get in. They'd left it that way as a precaution in case someone was wandering around outside. They would quiet down to ensure that no one overheard them or feel any off vibrations if they were an earth elementalist. They decided this was their best solution to their concerns about being caught without their masks. Kakashi's warning about the invasion and what it could entail was not something that they took lightly. Without Kakashi always present to check their training field was secure, they came up with an alternate option that still kept Kakashi's rules in place. Ibiki didn't look happy that we didn't immediately start the next exam, remarked Sakura, the small lantern creating heavy shadows on her visage. Usually the second exam begins directly after the first. Sasuke nodded. It's probably because we sent Kabuto to T&I. Wasn't it Anko that was in charge of the second exam? Naruto chuckled. Yes. She was bragging about it at the broken kunai. Sakura gave him a blank look. The what? Ninja-only bar and lounge, muttered Sasuke. My mother got mad at my father once for going there and coming home drunk. His teammates gave him warm looks to ease his discomfort about mentioning his family. Anko must have been at T&I when Kabuto arrived. Naruto huffed. Not sure if that's good luck or bad. If Kakashi's right and Orochimaru is involved, she's going to lose it. Why? Asked Sasuke, voicing what he and Sakura both were thinking. Naruto grunted. There are nearly as many nasty whispers about her as there are about me. He grimaced. She used to be his apprentice before he apparently turned on her and became a traitor. Some even say she's cursed and that he left her here as a sleeper agent. Naruto shrugged. I doubt she's a sleeper. Old man wouldn't trust her in T&I if there was cause for concern. He sighed. However, if she holds as much anger towards him as it sounds like she does, she'll probably jump right into the thick of things without thinking it through. Sasuke sighed. Naruto, have I ever told you how terrifying your CN is? By what? Naruto blinked at him. Your clone network, Sakura supplied. You probably have enough dirt to completely ruin the village if you wanted to. Naruto scoffed. Why would I do that? Sakura gave him a soft smile. We're just saying, Ruto. Your info is that good. He blushed and ducked his head under the praise. Thanks, he mumbled. Moving on, what's our plan? Sasuke shifted to rest his back against the cool stone. You said the second exams are more survival and mission-oriented. He looked at Sakura. The Pincat nodded. From what Naruto's clones could tell when they were scouting around, there was a booth being set up. There was also an interesting amount of scrolls off to the side at the mission's office yesterday. They had Earth and Heaven labels. Naruto snorted. Wanna bet that we need to get one of each for the next test? No bet. Crowed Sakura. She and Sasuke both learned not to bet against Naruto. The plucky blonde had an obscenely large amount of luck when it came to bets and gambling. Sasuke shuddered. And it has something to do with the Forest of Death. Naruto and Sakura tilted their heads at him. Forest of Death. They echoed. Officially it's called Training Ground 44. Its nickname is Forest of Death because it's so dangerous that usually only the elite ninja enter it for training. Sasuke scowled. Itachi brought it up to father a few times. Itachi was curious about its potential, and father spoke about the dangerous creatures and plants lurking in it. It's supposed to be very effective for training in hazardous environments. I heard there were even sections of it that were barred from anyone not a jounin. Naruto whistled lowly. That sounds like a pain. Sasuke shrugged, not inclined to speak anymore after voicing anything to do with Itachi. Sakura suddenly snapped her fingers. That's it. She beamed at them. There's an old tower located in there. I read up on the different training grounds when we were in the academy. 44 is supposed to have an old guard tower or something in the middle of it. I bet we're supposed to get to the tower. Right, so, plans. Naruto's blue eyes darted between them. Sasuke shrugged again, still not ready to speak anything aloud. Sakura bit her lip and thought. Honestly, there are too many variables. We could narrow some down, but it would take all night and we can't afford to miss sleep. If it's actually in the Forest of Death, we will be lacking in undisturbed sleep for quite some time. Sasuke grunted in agreement. Naruto grimaced. Plus, it opens opportunities for people like Snake Face. Sakura groaned. I'd forgotten about that. It would be the perfect time for him to slip in. She rubbed her forehead in irritation. And even if Kabuto had any useful information, he probably wouldn't share it in time for it to make a difference tomorrow. Naruto nodded sagely. Sasuke glared at him for it. Naruto stuck out his tongue. Boys, Sakura said lowly, a hint of warning in her voice. She smiled charmingly when both boys perked up like obedient children. Honestly, Snakeface poses the biggest threat. Her expression became solemn. If he's indeed after Sasuke, the forest gives him plenty of free opportunities for an attack or kidnapping. Considering they can't monitor the entire place, we'd be like sitting ducks. They won't bend the rules for us either, remarked Naruto. It could be considered a form of cheating and could cause a huge amount of problems for the old man if someone found out about it. We'll be on our own. Sakura groaned. This is not fair. When are they? Remarked Naruto, a faint trace of bitterness and melancholy lacing his words. Sakura sighed and leaned into the shorter boy as a silent show of comfort. Sasuke looked away but shifted forward enough that one knee was touching Naruto's and the other Sakura's. They sat like that for a few minutes, allowing camaraderie and comfort to soothe some of their clamoring fears. If nothing else, Team 7 had each other. Needle in a haystack. Remarked Sasuke, voice subdued. Sakura and Naruto exchanged looks. It's our best bet, remarked Sakura. Chapter 6. Janken Pawn. Sasuke scowled at Naruto, who was looking equally fierce. Sakura was standing off to the side looking put out. Anko was standing between the two boys, a hand over their fists pushed up together. Anko smirked, completely ignoring the crowd of genin trickling into the clearing and staring at the group with bemusement. Janken Pawn. Cried Anko, jerking her hand up into the air. TCH. Sasuke's frown deepened as Naruto whooped loudly and danced around in wild circles. Oh yeah. I'm awesome. Naruto crowed. Sakura groaned. Why? Why did I get stuck on a team with an idiot? Anko laughed loudly. Oh, come on Pinky. At least it doesn't get boring. She slung an arm around the young teen's shoulders. Sakura glanced at Naruto doing a weird butt wiggle shimmy thing and gave Anko a bland look. Anko simply snickered. Still not boring. Yosh. I want to partake in this youthful challenge. Boomed a loud voice. Lee popped up out of nowhere with a swoosh, posing stylishly with a fist in the air and a wide gleaming grin. And then his eyes landed on Sakura and he gasped, snapping to a bow in front of her. Beautiful maiden. I will protect you until I die. Will you go on a date with me? Sakura facepalmed. It's your fault. I blame you was written all over her face as she shot Anko and Naruto dark looks. The SH. Bushy brows doesn't stand a chance. Naruto waved a hand flippantly, drawing Lee's attention away from Sakura. Naruto sent Sakura a discreet look as he flashed a grin at Lee and she gave him a coded hidden gesture of thanks. I protest. I shall win this challenge. If I can't win I'll carry me through the forest on your back. Commanded Naruto, pointing a finger dramatically. The gathering of genin sweat dropped while Sasuke and Sakura shot the blonde incredulous looks. Lee hesitated, not used to someone actually giving him a challenge other than Guy-sensei. Why Yosh. I shall endeavor to carry you through the forest on my back. Denton spluttered. What? You can't promise something like that. This isn't a co-op mission. She smacked him on the back of the head. Says who? Demanded the blonde, crossing his arms defiantly. He shot Anko a look. You said we just had to get 2 of them scrolls, right? He shrugged. It ain't against the rules. Anko blinked, tilted her head to the side and laughed. Well, the brat has a point. I didn't actually mention anything about that. She sighed, looking put out. However, if I let that go, the Hokage will have my head because you brats will start an all-out war in there. So. She clapped loudly. Listen up. New rule. You know, besides trying not to die. She chuckled sinisterly. No teaming up. This exam isn't about genin teams from the same village ganging up on other teams. Shikamaru shot the blonde a faint dirty look. He hadn't exactly planned on teaming up with anyone, but being denied the useful opportunity didn't make him happy. Naruto sked. Nah, it ain't like he's helping me get a scroll. He scowled at Anko. He'd just be my ride. It should be fine, right? Anko sighed. As much as I want to allow that to pass, I can't. Think of something else. Ugh, fine. Naruto squinted at the green-clad genin. After a moment of staring, a slow devious smirk crawled across his face. Got it. He snapped his fingers. If you fail, you have to go to Ino-chan for a complete makeover. And you have to keep it up for a full month. Lee blinked owlishly. Makeover? Ino looked torn between being horrified and manically happy. Naruto nodded sharply. After the second exam, you have to talk to her about a complete makeover. Yosh. If I fail this challenge I shall do so. What will you do? Remarked Ino, trying to get back at her fellow blonde for throwing her to the wolves like that. Does the same rule apply to you? She gave him a daring look. Naruto grimaced, clutching his orange jacket like it was a lifeline. Why yes sure, he gave her a weak grin. She gave him a triumphant smirk. Perfect. She clapped her hands and strode over to the 2 boys. Since I have to be part of this, that means I will referee. She held up her hand, palm down. Ready? Both boys stepped forward looking ready for battle. Ready. Their fists met under Ino's palm. Ino's lips pursed into a thin line. Jan Kenpon. She shouted, throwing up her hand. Yosh. Lee's whipped to Ino, tears streaming down his face. It seems I am to be your student. It was clear he was both determined to see his challenge through and was struggling with the idea that he could not mimic his idol for a month. Naruto smugly grinned, hands behind his head. Ino still looked like she wasn't sure whether she wanted to strangle Naruto or thank him for the fashion disaster before her. It had its pros and cons, and she still wasn't decided which one was tilted in her favor. Her eyebrow was twitching dangerously under Lee's continuous onslaught of heaping praises. She wasn't able to process how to handle his overbearing focus, as even Naruto's enthusiasm didn't reach such ridiculous heights. When are we starting the exam? Grumbled a sound genin. Kin was scowling next to her teammates, arms crossed and unimpressed with the Leaf Shinobis's antics. Anko's hand whipped out and struck true. In her hand was a piece of paper that she'd used to nick the genin's cheek and draw blood. Now, lil cannon fodder, don't be in such a rush to die. Her grin was sadistic as she licked the blood from the frozen genin's cheek. After all, you still haven't signed my little waiver. I can't have anyone blaming me for your deaths after all. She waved the paper tauntingly. Kin shivered, she stared blankly at the piece of paper that cutter that Anko thrust into her hand. Everybody get your waivers. I want them signed before anyone can even think about entering the forest. Anko gestured to a Chunin with a stack of said papers in hand. And hurry it up. You're taking too long. There were some dirty looks shot at her, but no one dare say a word after what happened to Kin. Iruka breathed in a deep sigh of relief. He'd been gone for several weeks on an important B-rank mission, and he was finally home. He had a nice easy mission now, one ride at home. All he had to do was be ready for a summons for the second exam. Better yet, no one had pranked him since his return either. He was headed towards the lounge the Leaf Jounin sensei were relaxing. Most of them had come to spend the first day there bragging about their students, even if most of them expected their genin to take a day or more to pass the second round. Iruka had missed the first exam and was anxious to see who had been entered and who had passed the first round. He glanced at a clock. If he was right, it had already been about an hour or so since the task had begun. The scarred Chunin was pretty sure that meant most of the Jounin were still loitering around Psing. There would probably be some betting pools started as well. He knocked and poked his head into the room. Hey, can anyone update me on who's still in the exams? Iruka was a little startled to find most of the jounin shifted as one to stare at one corner of the room. 3 fresh genin jounin and a few veteran teams were huddled there. It seemed to be the special spot for bragging rights. Iruka was baffled to find his rookie 12, all of whom he taught within the last year, had been entered. The poor academy teacher spluttered, hands gesticulating wildly. It was a 10-second spectacle before he inhaled sharply and his special big head jutsu roared inside the crowded room. What were you thinking? They just graduated. Bet you a whole stack of explosive notes that my team gets to the tower before yours, Kakashi said stoically. I mean, I did hear some interesting rumors about a bet one of your students lost to Naruto. He eyed Guy meaningfully. I cried manly tears. Your student is quite youthful. I had not prepared Lee for such a crushing defeat. I shall have to promise him he is not dishonoring the green by following through on his challenge. Asuma's cigarette almost fell out of his mouth. Kurenai's eye twitched. Kakashi hummed. Dishonoring the green. I nodded solemnly. It is a proud and honored tradition. The green has been strong, true, and loyal. I will prepare the shrine. I will ensure that Lee is safe from retribution by honoring the green before he begins his trial. Most of the room leaned away a bit, not entirely sure if Guy was being serious. Kakashi barely suppressed a snicker. Hey! Shouted Iruka, having stomped across the room after being so obviously ignored. I was talking to you. Why did you enter fresh graduates? He was, honestly, reasonably concerned. He had taught all of 12 of those genin, and they were his, secretly favorite, students. He couldn't quite believe any of them had grown into competent genin in such a short time frame. They were, for all intents and purposes, prepubescent kids. He knew it took time for them to break old habits, and this batch had plenty to break. Kakashi peeked over his shoulder at the irate teacher. You say something. Curse you and your hip and cool attitude. Boomed Guy, fist clenched, despite the fact it wasn't being directed at him. Iruka's jaw dropped. Kurenai and Asuma watched in amusement as the poor Chunin's face started to glow a deep angry red. I began Iruka. Poof. Suddenly the Chunin was gone, leaving the jounin staring at the pending storm in the corner that was now sunny and warm. I turned to Kakashi with a horrified gaze. What did you do? He pointed an accusing finger that almost took Asuma's eye out. What despicable corners of the earth did you send that poor soul? Kakashi swirled his sake, staring into the small saucer with his other arm slung casually over the back of the couch he was sitting on. He relaxed further into the seat with a hum, left leg comfortably crossed over his right knee. He paused. Out came the patented eye smile, beaming out with vicious intensity that made Kurenai and Asuma blink a few times to ensure their vision was clear. Guy jerked back clutching at his chest, as if Kakashi had somehow magically thrown a kunai with just a look. There was a beat of absolute silence, Kakashi's invisible but beaming smile lighting up the whole room with its brilliance. Right up until Anko started cackling. Kami-sama. You guys are suckers. Someone reached the tower. She started cackling again, only to choke on her spit after realizing what she'd just said. She coughed roughly before recovering, head snapping up with disbelief as every eye on the room trained on her. You can't be serious, remarked Asuma. His cigarette was laying forgotten on the floor, having finally succumbed to gravity after toying with the idea of freedom the past 10 minutes. The tower is a full hour from the gates. They would have to run full bore as soon as the gates were opened. He pointed to a clock on the wall for emphasis. It's barely been an hour and a half. They wouldn't have had time to get a second scroll, let alone navigate unknown dangerous territory. Anko just stared at him a breath before she huffed irritably, leaning back and crossing her arms with something that could, but wouldn't, for fear of one's safety, be called a pout. Don't ask me. Brat should have taken a full day to accomplish the task. She started wondering if she'd made the test too easy. She grimaced. It was made worse by the fact she'd given Ibiki a bunch of crap about how lax his test was if she had to deal with that many genin. Ibiki's payback was gonna be hell. And believed that Iruka continued mid-rant. Iruka-sensei. Cheered a very familiar voice. Iruka froze, the broom clouds of doom behind him fading instantly. A blonde missile launched itself into his gut, nearly sending him sprawling. And Naruto. A very comforting whiskered smile greeted him, blue eyes squeezed shut as Naruto chuckled. We totally rock. Boasted the blonde. Iruka's gaze darted up to find the blonde's 2 teammates. Sakura looked exasperated while Sasuke gazed moodily at the door they'd entered moments ago. Iruka felt faint. You passed. Naruto backed away, hands automatically going behind his head as he cheerfully grinned at his bemused sensei. We're awesome like that. How? Stammered Iruka, still floored that his worst arranged genin team had already reached the tower. It had to be a new damned record. Naruto's face morphed into cautious suspicion. We pass. No take-backs. Iruka could only nod dazedly. You pass. No take-backs. His gaze focused on familiar blue eyes. How? Naruto's easygoing smirk returned. Well, duh. We got the sneakiest pair of eyes on our team. He sent Sasuke a glare on reflex. Bastard stole the other scroll while Sakura was dealing with the guy handing out ours. He snickered. The guy had no idea. Sasuke grunted, but there was a faint twitch of his lips in pride at his handiwork. Iruka stared. How did you? He waved distractedly at the tower. So fast. Naruto sent Sakura a winning smile. Sakura-chan is awesome. She totally read this scroll or something back in the academy and remembered where it was. She even knew the fastest way to get here. Naruto did not mention that the fastest way had been a tunnel they'd used the headhunter jutsu to reach. After all, only Chunin and Up were supposed to know that the tunnel even existed. It was once used as an evacuation precaution, but now only was used very rarely as a medic evacuation when a Jounin went a little overboard training in the Forest of Death. Naruto also, intentionally, failed to mention that the forest was still littered with hundreds of his cage bunshin. A good number of them looked exactly like his team, while others were henged and wandering around. The henged clones were either causing mischief with other teams or mapping out the forest out of pure curiosity. Iruka didn't notice the subtle shiver of disgust run through Naruto when a squad of said henge clones got murdered by huge acidic slugs during their conversation. That had been unpleasant. Harder still to keep the horror off his face. Iruka shifted, trying to come to terms with the fact the team he had, unhappily, expected to fail the hardest and the most until they grew up, was, miraculously, doing the best. Yes, he had faith in them. But they were so much like oil being introduced to fire he honestly had no idea how they hadn't combusted yet. He waved down the hall. Let's go get you set up with a room. This exam is supposed to take several days, so rooms have been prepared. He had no idea the rooms were only prepared on time due to the furor that happened with Kabuto's unexpected capture. Naruto followed, eagerly making excited noises or comments at the right time as Iruka led them further into the tower. Sasuke and Sakura exchanged worried looks. They'd been crazy lucky with that tunnel. Snakeface probably knew about it too. Luckily, if he was around, he would be too focused above ground to think any genin knew about the tunnel below. All three genin knew that they were playing a dangerous game, and they really hoped that Naruto's clones kept the creep busy so he didn't realize that they were already at the tower and still stupid easy pickings. None of them wanted to deal with that debacle. They already planned to become scarce once Iruka was gone. If none of the other genin realized they were the team that made it first, the safer they would be. That meant the room that Iruka just took them to was going to be home to three henge clones once they were alone. Iruka smiled, having, somewhat, recovered from the unexpected shock to his system. Right, here you go. You three are rooming here until the second exam ends. You're free to wander the tower, but be warned, mischief and fighting are not permitted. He gave them all the obligatory look, try to stay out of trouble. His stern expression dropped and he smiled gently at them. Congratulations. I'm proud of you. He turned to exit the room, waving farewell. I'll be sure to root for you in the third exams. The door clicked shut behind the Chunin, his footsteps fading away down the hall. Team 7 stared blankly at the door several tense minutes. Finally certain the man was gone, they exhaled sharply, wobbly knees finally giving out as the three collapsed into a messy pile in the middle of the room. The henge they had been wearing collapsed, showing three dirt-covered and disheveled preteens. Sakura groaned softly, even knowing they were alone they wouldn't risk being overheard. My arms are killing me. I didn't realize the tunnel was so far underground. She winced as her arms shifted and the muscles spasmed. Sasuke grunted. Or that it would be that far to the tower. He hissed when Naruto pressed his weight into his thigh, the muscles screaming in agony. Sorry, murmured the blonde, having been trying to shift so he wasn't sprawled across his teammates' laps. He grimaced. We can't stay here too long. It's not safe. Sasuke and Sakura both nodded but didn't move. 20 minutes, mumbled the pinket. She shifted so she and Sasuke were back to back, using each other as support. Naruto grunted and moved so his head was resting on their shoulders. 20, he agreed. He barely had the energy to lift his arms and summon another cage bunshin. Stand watch. Wake us in 20. And then all three promptly passed out. The clone glared at them enviously, looking just as haggard as Naruto. Bastards. It moodily shifted so it could watch the door, a kunai in hand. Iruka swallowed thickly, head bowed and hands minutely trembling. He walked through the halls like a man headed to the gallows. His eyes were wide and unfocused, staring blankly at the floor as his feet led him down the hall. He reached his destination, the door looming before him. He slowly looked up at it, pale and shaking, as if a demon lay in wait on the other side to devour him. His hand twitched, clenched, and then slowly rose to reach for the knob. He inhaled sharply, pausing. He grimaced, squeezing his eyes tightly closed. He grit his teeth and threw the door open with a bang. He stomped forward with all the resolution he could muster, head high, chest puffed out. Iruka thrust a bottle of sake into Kakashi's hands. Iruka stayed in a semi-bow, his pride screaming at him for his actions. The rest of the room had become dead silent the moment the door had been thrown open. Everyone was watching with bated breath. "I apologize for my earlier behavior," began Iruka, his voice tight with tension. "I was in error." Iruka snapped upright so sharply he almost nicked Kakashi's nose with his ponytail. Iruka didn't meet the taller Jounin's gaze, simply turning about sharply and stomping back out of the room. Dead silence followed in his wake. I looked honestly mortified at this point. He had been admittedly taking the mickey out on everyone earlier about sending the poor Chunin to some sort of hellish place. Now, Guy was eyeing his rival with budding distrust. Had his longtime rival gone too far? Had he broken the poor Chunin? Had Anko been incorrect in her assessment? It made a shiver run down the green-clad Jounin's spine. Kakashi stared at the door, bottle held lightly in his grasp. Asuma blinked, dark gaze turning to his friend. "What the hell did you do?" Kakashi had absolutely no idea. The silver-haired man cleared his throat and raised the bottle. "A toast." I smiled. "For our genin still in the exams." Which only opened a floodgate for Guy's honorable ways of treating fellow shinobi speech. Kakashi moved around the impassioned green beast, calmly opening the sake bottle and generously pouring sake into the saucers of the Jounin, with genin still in the exams. Asuma decided he really didn't want to know, and Kurenai was still too flustered with her last encounter with Team 7 to question its Jounin instructor, even if she really wanted to pick his brains. The man was a genius. But his behavior was so ridiculous, she had no idea what to take seriously and what to dismiss. It was a frustrating quandary that Asuma had already told her to leave alone repeatedly. "Cheers," Kakashi said with an off-upbeat tone, his own filled saucer raised. "Yup," mentally concluded both Kurenai and Asuma as they also silently raised their saucers, not worth the effort. Chapter 7. Boo. 5 days doesn't seem like a long time. In the grand scheme of things, it's almost laughably short. However, when you have a megalomaniac out for your head, but you have no idea when they're going to strike, 5 days feels like torture. Really, the genin of Team 7 should be applauded for making it a full 24 hours before they lost their cool and needed an outlet for their stress. They were only genin, and high stakes like an S-rank shinobi being out for your head usually didn't occur until you at least made Chunin or an impressive name for yourself. Team 7 hadn't done either of those. So, Team 7 was on high alert, stressed, and confined to a rather small space. One building really wasn't enough for their kind of energy. They were limited on where they could go, and they weren't stupid enough to practice or train, while other genin could potentially see what they were doing. They were also quite used to being pressed to the max both physically and mentally on a daily basis. The sitting and waiting was going to end up getting ugly rather soon, and rather than end up accidentally blowing up the whole place, they came up with an alternative. As Kakashi would say, adapt. Besides, local ninja or foreign ninja, Team 7 had the perfect solution to do what they do best. Damari, if she knew who the culprits were, would surely disagree. She shook out her uniform and slipped it on, distracted by the fact she and Kankuro had to be in close quarters with Gaara for 4 more days. Already Kankuro had almost gotten them turned into paste twice by yammering on foolishly about stupid things. Damari had barely been able to talk Gaara down, using the exam itself as her ace in the hole. Only her insistence about stronger foes in the near future if he was patient had kept him from smearing red on the walls. Damari stepped out from behind the blind she'd set up to change behind, neatly folding it back down to size. What the Kankuro pointed wildly at her. "What did you do to your uniform?" Damari paused, hands aloft to fix her hair into its signature look. "Huh?" She glanced down. Her arms immediately dropped to cover herself. The entire top front half of her outfit had been cut out, leaving only her mesh armor underneath. What did you do, you pig?" Her whole face was bright red as she glared murderously at Kankuro. "Hey. I didn't do it." He waved his hands emphatically in front of him. "Who else would have done it?" she hissed. She stalked towards him, one hand pulling out a kunai. "Gaara wouldn't dare let anyone else enter our room." "I didn't do it," insisted Kankuro, grabbing Karasu and thrusting the puppet between them as Tamari's hand slashed out. "The FF Tamari blinked. Kankuro howled in fury. "Where the hell is Karasu?" In his hands was a dumpy stuffed doll with a Hinohinamaheji painted on the head under an old yellowed mop. Tamari had gutted the large doll, and stuffing was pooling all over the floor. Tamari eyed the ugly thing before stepping away as her brother ranted about the kinds of torture the culprit would be in for. She glanced down at her outfit with a scowl. If it wasn't Kankuro, who the hell was it? How on earth did they get past Gaara? Kankuro's loud voice could be heard echoing down the hall as another Leaf Chunin led a newly arrived team, the team that Kabuto's team would have decimated, to their room. Instead, the AIM genin followed obediently to a door that the Chunin moved to open, wisely choosing not to investigate what all the ruckus down the hall was about. "This is where you'll be staying for," spoke the Chunin, knob twisting and the door swinging open with a soft creak. Splat, the Chunin and 3 genin stood in stunned silence. "Is this a joke?" asked one of the melee genin, anger leaking into his voice. All 4 were sopping wet, an arsenal of popped balloons littering the floor around them. When the genin turned to the Chunin, they were startled to find the man's face pale. "Not here," murmured the Chunin, eyes wild. "Anywhere but here." He whimpered. "I swear, I thought this was a safe job. It's the commie damn Chunin exams. How? How?" And then he shunshined out of there like the place had gone up in flames, leaving 3 confused and unhappy soaked genin behind. "Konoha is whack," remarked the leader of the trio, shaking his head and moving towards their temporary residence. His teammates edged away under his kai, his body completely covered with flour. "Where is Karasu?" demanded Kankuro, grabbing the nearest aim genin and shaking her furiously. They hadn't heard his thundering approach due to their shock. "Let her go." The other male of the group threw a shuriken at the enraged Sunanin, making him drop the aim teen. Their leader stepped out into the hall, his kai filling the space in a 5-foot radius. "Is this your fault?" Kankuro gaped. "The Fusuke happened to you. Where are the baths?" Kankuro pointed. "That way." He couldn't help the amused smirk that crossed his lips as he watched the trio moodily walk down the hall. He snickered when they were out of sight. He blanched. "Wait. Karasu." Kankuro barreled down the hall, screaming at the top of his lungs. "Karasu." A small mouse scurried away in a staggering fashion. It barely made it into a tiny hole before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Ara was a little disturbed that the walls unexpectedly started laughing. He was used to the voice in his head. That was normal. But when the walls themselves started snickering, he decided that maybe he should go sit with his siblings. Weird things like that didn't happen when they were around. Iridid abruptly pivoted on his foot and walked right back the way he'd come, rather than continue to explore in solitude, completely ignoring the nervous sweat breaking out across his brow. When Kankuro shot past him, blathering on about that stupid puppet and some interesting forms of torture, Gaara hesitated. Kankuro disappeared around the corner he'd just come from. Kankuro yelped, followed by a loud thud. A short bit later, Kankuro was squealing like a stuck pig. The walls laughed again, only closer this time, like people were standing on either side of him. Gaara froze, eyes glancing up and down the hall. Kankuro had turned the corner, and that left the Iridid the sole occupant of that stretch of hallway. Cold sweat trickled down Gaara's spine. Gaara shunshined without thought, instantly transporting himself to his and his siblings' room. He suppressed a shudder and quickly opened the door. Tamari pinned him with a glower. The usually meek blonde looked like she was reading around in his brain for answers, untold threats glittering in her dark eyes. She was crouched on her bed in one of Kankuro's black undershirts, a needle and thread in hand. Usually Gaara would put her in her place. Such looks were laughable after dealing with the things their father had thrown at him. But the laughter had left him a little on edge. So, instead of him immediately threatening her, they just stared at each other for several tense moments before Tamari sked and focused back on the garment in her hands. Gaara paused once more. He had never been frightened or intimidated by his siblings, but someone had clearly pissed Tamari off to a point she'd forgotten her fear of him enough to actually wordlessly threaten him. That meant she might be foolish enough to actually follow through with it too. Gaara usually didn't care one way or another, but if he were being honest, of his 2 siblings, Tamari had always been the most tolerable. If he killed her, he'd have to deal with Kankuro by himself, and Kankuro would probably be dead before the sun set, if that long. If he killed them, he'd have to deal with both Baki and his father. Ugh. He was just about to leave once more, only to hear a burst of giggling echo at the end of the hall. Gaara was inside the room and the door slammed resoundingly shut behind him in less than a heartbeat. Tamari was staring at him wide-eyed from her bed as he glared cautiously at the door like it was going to bite him. They remained that way another few minutes before Gaara finally turned from the wooden thing to face her. His gaze was completely expressionless, but his sand was still shifting around restlessly, revealing his unease. "Talk," he demanded, arms crossing over his chest. And for the life of her, Tamari couldn't find words to speak beyond confused spluttering and wild gestures. Chapter 8. Did someone say duck butt? Fate and destiny are powerful metaphysical constructs that man has both praised and cursed since the beginning of time. They are concepts that can profoundly alter someone's course through life. Some will devote their entire lives to these invisible powers, while others do their very best to smash through anything that remotely tries to mimic them in order to deny their hold on them. Either way, believe, don't believe when great change comes, it begins in the most unassuming fashion. Such profound moments that can alter the course of history can, surprisingly, happen in a single muffled heartbeat. Sasuke, of all people, was the perpetrator for such an instant. Many would scoff, reasonably so, that such a young foolish boy could have such power. But it would be wise to remember his current circumstances. The adorable genin of Team 7 had been trapped for an oncoming 3 days in a tiny tower and suffering unbearable boredom mixed sourly with paranoid stress. Such settings were always ripe for the birth of chaos, mayhem, or even just little philosophical ponderings that can sway entire nations to stand and fight for just causes and conquer enemies thrice their numbers. Sasuke, at that time, was sitting in a hidden closet-like space 6 feet below the dirt basement floor of the tower. Naruto had, quite irritatingly, chosen said depth so they could all be 6 feet under and no one would be the wiser. Sasuke would deny to his dying breath he had snorted painfully in amusement in an attempt to stifle his laughter. He also pretended that Sakura's hysterical giggling wasn't making that effort any easier. Moving on, however, back to Niji's most obsessive topic. They'd created this little nook for privacy. It had been working splendidly so far, even if it had only really been 2 days and counting. Still, day 3 it is indeed, and these 3 genin were meeting for another secret powwow. "Any sign?" asked Sakura. She's hugging her knees to her chest, green eyes focused on the small little candle burning between them. "Meh, not yet." Naruto picked at the dirt with a fingernail. "I've just about got a third of the forest mapped." He shuddered. "And I really dread the day Kakashi-sensei sends us here for training. We're lucky they decided to block some of the more dangerous areas to prevent the majority of the genin in here dying." "Speaking of Kakashi-sensei," began Sakura. She would never know how those words would be the door in which Sasuke would unintentionally alter the future. "Do you think there's a way to convince him to stop reading his perverted book so often?" Naruto rolled his eyes. "You know he does it as a cover." "Well, yeah, but he also has to enjoy them, right? I mean, have you seen his collection? It's got its own shrine. It's even sealed in a fancy glass decorative case so they can't get dusty." The disgust and disbelief were heavy in her voice. Naruto sighed, leaning back against the wall. "I don't understand why girls are always ragging on him for reading that stuff. I mean, girls are just as perverted." Sasuke shivered as the temperature in the small space suddenly and inexplicably dropped. "What?" Sakura's voice was deceptively calm. Naruto waved a hand at her nonchalantly, apparently completely missing the glaring warning signs. Sasuke was discreetly trying to sign him to back down, really not wanting to be stuck in a 5 foot by 5 foot room when Sakura goes berserk. "Seriously, girls are just as bad. I mean, come on. Just look at the fangirls that stalk Sasuke." Naruto huffed, completely missing Sasuke's imitation of a ghost and Sakura trying to become a darker shade of pink than her hair. "They're relentless. I know that some of them were even bold enough to steal some of his underwear." Sasuke did a whole body twinge as he gaped in horror at his blonde teammate. Apparently, this was news to him. "You're joking," hissed Sakura, looking a little green herself. Naruto shook his head. "Nope. Totally found them outside the Uchiha compound squealing over a pair, passing them around to snuggle and smack." Sasuke was trembling in trauma, his hand slapped across Naruto's mouth in absolute terror. He shook his head silently side to side, unable to verbally command the blonde to never speak of such horrors ever again. Sakura leaned away with a slow cornered cat-like exhale. "So that's what Ami was gloating about that one year. She never said, but she wouldn't shut up about it." Naruto carefully peeled Sasuke's hand from his face. "Yeah, well, point stands. Girls are just as perverted. They just get away with it cause they're girls." Sakura shook her head vehemently. "No way. It's totally different. Girls don't go around reading trash like Icha in public. That's only because there isn't a book geared towards them. I bet if Icha had a female lead, the women would go nuts over it." Naruto smirked. "And you just admitted they would read it, just not in public." Sakura gasped, affronted. "I did no such thing." "You totally did. Didn't she, Sasuke?" Sasuke was still holding himself and shivering, ignoring the conversation completely. That didn't stop Naruto and Sakura from carrying on. They argued for another 5 minutes about the topic before Sasuke finally snapped out of it. "Seriously?" argued Naruto. "If there was a female version of Icha, women all over would be reading it. I bet you would read it." The raven-haired genin scoffed loudly, momentarily distracting the two. "If that's the case, why don't you just make one?" Sakura and Naruto stared at him blankly for a couple of moments before slow smiles started creeping across their faces. As he watched, Sasuke was mortified when said grins became almost manic and a disturbingly familiar glint entered their eyes. It was exactly in that moment when both of his teammates exchanged such predatory grins, Sasuke realized he effed up. And if it wasn't already obvious, this was exactly when fate and destiny took a nosedive and shattered any sort of preconceived plans they were fostering. So, unbeknownst to the happily ignorant shinobi nations, 3 genin 6 feet under were about to decimate the world as they knew it. As the day wore on and eventually faded into night, Sakura and Naruto were hatching the most inconceivable plan a genin had ever had the nerve or guts to try. Despite his misgivings, Sasuke was a member of Team 7. He sat there and helped plan right along with them. Hours passed, notes were made, ideas exchanged, and before sunrise the next day, the rough draft for society's doom was resting innocently in the hands of 3 prepubescent teens, stuck in an exam they are scared of dying too young in. Kakashi was completely flummoxed when he started crying in the middle of reading one of his favorite passages of Icha. That he's surrounded by the majority of his fellow jounin in their favorite watering hole wasn't helping matters either. Mind you, it was amusing to watch everyone's faces contort in such bizarre ways because of his inexplicable crying fit. Admittedly, his favorites were the other 3 rookie genin team leaders. Guy looked like he's having a seizure, limbs flying about spastically all over the place. Best part. The green-clad ninja was completely stunned mute. Asuma managed to drop his cigarette in his crotch and not notice for a good 30 seconds. By the time he does notice, his pants were quite literally on fire and he began beating himself in public to put out the flames. Kurenai kept throwing her hands up and screaming Kai. Over and over again. Kakashi would be laughing himself sick over it later. For now, Kakashi hammed it up and morphed his face into the perfect example of woe, allowing the falling tears to glisten just so in the light. Anko was chortling so hard behind him she almost peed herself. It also sounded like she's choking to death because she's having a hard time breathing. Kakashi briefly wondered if it's possible to die from laughter. Across town, Hiruzen had just pulled out his favorite reading material. He'd gotten a pretty good dent in all that he paused, glaring at the inbox on his desk to ensure it hadn't magically filled to the overflowing point when he'd almost used the forbidden word. When the stack demurely remained the same size, Hiruzen blessed his luck he'd caught himself in time and returned to the orange book in his hands. A happy grin curled his lips as he began to crack open the book to where he'd left off. The old wizened Hokage stared blankly at the 2 separate halves of his lovely book divided equally in either hand. One of the ANBU hidden in the room coughed. The small muffled sound was just enough to snap Hiruzen out of his horrified trance. And, to the shock of everyone in that section of town, a wail of absolute despair pierced the air and echoes through the buildings, like the cry of a man who'd lost everything precious to him. Everyone who heard it shivered. Before the ANBU could quite conceive what to do with their squalling leader, his Kai suddenly flooded the room and nearly brought them to their knees. The eagle, he growled, not even turning around when the eagle ANBU dropped forward to a knee behind him. Spread the word. We prepare for war. We are in red alert. No one goes on patrol alone and all minor missions are being put on hold. The old man sneered at the destroyed book in his hands. We have received a bad omen indeed. He pousied, realizing Eagle was still behind him. Go. He snapped. The eagle dipped his head and disappeared. The other ANBU left behind silently cursed their brethren's luck. He'd been sent on a bogus mission as they'd already been preparing for war due to the suspected invasion that would occur soon. It meant he didn't have to sit and struggle to breathe through Hiruzen's roiling Kai for the next 3 hours. Lucky bastard. Sitting on a roof across the village, Zabuza felt a cold wind crawl down his spine. He paused mid-bite, chopsticks hovering in the air inches from his shark-like teeth. Zabuza? Queried Haku, confused by his master's behavior. It's them, rumbled the bare-chested man, twisting his head just enough to narrow his eyes in the direction he knew the forest of death rests. Haku tilted his head to the side. Team 7. He guessed. Zabuza only got weird when it's Team 7. The older nin could give 2 SHTS about the rest of the village so far, but if Team 7 was involved, Zabuza got twitchy. Not that Haku blamed him. Haku had developed a tic that he had to force into submission every time he saw a hint of blonde or pink hair, LCB filling random villagers and Konohan in with sebum. He had accidentally killed a few ducks though. He felt a little guilty about that. Those poor ducks, well, Master Zabuza had enjoyed the roasted duck, so maybe it wasn't all bad. They've done something, said Zabuza, interrupting Haku's thoughts. Don't they always? Asked Haku, a little put out that there usually wasn't a time Team 7 hadn't done something. Zabuza's eyes snapped to Teen across from him, internally startled at his minion's cheek. He grinned. Maybe those irritating brats were good for something. Haku got weirded out when Zabuza started grinning at him widely, the older nin's teeth flashing menacingly in the dim lighting. Far away in a quaint little town that was still bubbling with excitement even as the hour started to get late, Jiraiya was completely flabbergasted as he sunshined all across town in a mad panic. He grew paler each time he stopped to look around at his new destination before popping away just as quickly. At long last, there, in the distance hope flickered before him like a dying man in a desert finding an oasis. Jiraiya cried tears of joy as he raced towards his goal, arms outstretched and hands blade wide. He threw open the doors to the public baths and was completely crushed that his salvation had turned out to be a mirage. Staring at Jiraiya in confusion was a whole bunch of buck-naked men enjoying a good soak. "No!" roared Jiraiya. He's completely unable to fathom, in a town full of 19 different bathhouses, that all of them were completely empty of any women. Chapter 9. Oro Chichichi Maeru. Orochimaru was pretty proud of the fact he could keep his cool during chaotic situations. Plus, it was entertaining to torment your enemy by looking amused the whole time, it tended to piss your enemy off. Tazzing insignificant little genin was so laughably easy that taunting them was the only sort of enjoyment he got out of it. So, it was a little unexpected that the blonde one came barging out of nowhere to sucker punch his summons away from the frozen Uchiha. First off, he hadn't expected the blonde to have any sort of capability to accomplish something like that, let alone escape his first summons. Worse, after giving his teammate a verbal lashing that made Orochimaru want to snicker, the blonde turned a scowl on the still disguised man. I don't see what you're so sacred of. It's not like this pasty-ass chick is Oro prick. I mean, come on. The blonde rolled his eyes before doing a very insulting flappy dance with his hands and hip wiggle while sing-songing Oro 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 Chichichichi may I eru. I play with little boys and piss my pants when Sarutobi leaves. Orochimaru's eyebrow twitched, but he resisted his initial response of gutting the kid while hurling back insults as well. He waited a couple seconds to see if the fool would stop, but the blonde was belting out the song with oblivious pride. The snake Sannin decided he would put an end to the degrading display. Kukuku, funny you should mention that, eh? Oro 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 Chichichichi my eru. Continued the blonde, practically screaming the stupid little made-up lyrics. I think I'm the second coming of Kami-sama. And I like to. Shut your trap you little ingrate. Roared Orochimaru, finally losing patience. He flickered across the gap separating them and shook the brat by his collar. I'm the Orochimaru. Snake Sannin and. Hayek, droned the little airhead. Orochimaru is supposed to be like, super badass and terrifying. You're some creepy lady with bad skin. The pink-haired one snickered. There was an odd roaring sound in Orochimaru's ears as he hurled the blonde at his teammates. They cried out, falling in an undignified heap against the trunk of the tall tree. Badass. Badass I'll show you badass. Kai crashed through the forest like a tidal wave, crushing the annoying brats to the branch they were on. Orochimaru sneered at them, grabbing his false face and slowly ripping it from his proper visage. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? He hissed dangerously. Who you're mocking so thoughtlessly? The blonde one brightened, completely ignoring the suffocating Kai to pop right back to his feet to bounce into his ridiculous little dance. Yup. It's Oro 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 Chichich. A hail of kunai shot at the blonde, his two teammates crying out in horror as the deadly blades all impacted with heavy thuds. Orochimaru preened as the blonde idiot gaped stupidly at him before he started to topple off the branch. Then the blonde bastard grinned. Just kidding. And disintegrated into a pile of mud. Orochimaru stared. The Uchiha and the pink banshee were edging away. Orochimaru's gaze flicked to them, eyes wide with fury. Without a thought, he sent a wall of mud at the two surviving brats, utterly crushing them beneath the swift and unexpected attack. Orochimaru gloated over the pile of mud for all of 5 seconds, and then reality smacked him in the face when he realized he just crushed his prodigal host. In a fit of fury the likes only pathetic Chunin and below would fall fate to. Orochimaru hopped over to the mess, muttering his frustration under his breath. What is it with blondes? Why am I cursed to deal with such annoying pests? How is it that they have the stupid and inexplicable ability to piss me off at the drop of a hat? First it was Tsunade who could demolish trees with a single flick of her finger and had mood swings from hell. Then there was that fool Minato that stole my rightful place as Hokage. Then I had to deal with that numbskull who calls explosions art, and now I have to deal with some prepubescent kid who's so idiotic he intentionally taunts S-class criminals. Orochimaru chewed the dirt with a frown. Such a vulgar mess. Stupid blonde for making him have to deal with it, he totally ignored the fact he was the one to make said mess. He silently prayed that the Uchiha managed to survive, especially as Orochimaru wasn't entirely certain the raven-haired boy's eyes would have been spared his fury if the Uchiha indeed perished. The snake Sannin rolled his eyes and huffed, deciding he would indeed waste chakra to use a water jutsu and see how bad he effed up. After all, it was deplorable if his clothes got dirty because some stupid blonde. Orochimaru mentally cut of the rant and focused on a low-level water jutsu to clean away the mud. Orochimaru was expecting broken bones, maybe some splashes of blood, and a couple crumpled bodies at his mercy. He wasn't expecting to find nothing but the Kami-forsaken tree staring at him without a single genin in sight. You look pissed, remarked a blithe voice from the side. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what expression your ugly ass face is wearing, but I could be wrong. Yellow eyes were wide as he slowly, oh so slowly, turned to find the orange-wearing midget squatting on a branch 2 trees over. The brat's head was cocked to the side and he was squinting at Orochimaru and rubbing his chin. Yep, continued the blonde, I'm pretty sure that's anger. He snapped his fingers and grinned like he'd just made some monumental connection. Orochimaru hadn't been this pissed since Jiraiya copped a feel of his ass when the idiot Toad Sannin thought Orochimaru was a girl due to his long silky black hair and patterned kimono he was wearing for a festival. Where is he? Orochimaru's voice was deceivingly calm. The punk shrugged and cleaned an ear with his pinky. Dunno. Team is probably starting some fight with another genin team for a scroll. He told me to go be a distraction elsewhere. The blonde rolled his eyes. He propped a cheek on his fist. So high. I'm a distraction. Unadulterated rage coursed through Orochimaru and he lashed out with vicious intensity. His kunai struck home and he felt the beginnings of bliss. Poof. The trees in a 20-meter radius were obliterated, leaving a fuming snake Sanin hissing in rage within the remaining crater. Whoa. A brown-haired youth staggered in line at the cafeteria inside Training Ground 44's tower. His raven-haired teammate reached out to steady him with a concerned frown. You okay? The brown-haired youth gave a smile. Yeah. I think that snake we had in the forest is just disagreeing with me. He made a woeful expression. Revenge for eating him, I guess. Their third teammate, a busty blonde, rolled her vibrant green eyes. Please, snakes don't go around getting revenge. The brunette frowned and crossed his arms with an aloof air. Shows what you know. This snake is totally pissed. He grabbed his gut. Guys fightin', even now. The raven-haired teen sighed. We ate that snake too. We're fine. Yeah, but I'm the one who killed him so we could eat him, so he's all vindictive of me. The brunette nodded resolutely. He held his firm stance for a beat longer before groaning and curling in on himself. No really, I'm not feeling so hot. I think I'm going to skip lunch and head back to the room. The raven-haired teen sighed again. I'll walk back with you. Don't want you collapsing somewhere inconvenient. His gaze darted meaningfully around the room at all the high-strung genin gathered there. Half of them were sporting splashes of bright paint, new unwanted haircuts, or patched-up clothes that had been whole previously to arriving at the tower. The blonde huffed and crossed her arms moodily. Great. We're skipping meal time again. I swear Mickey, when we get home, you're buying me 6 5-star meals. She glared at the brunette who was clutching his stomach and groaning lowly. I'm getting sick of ration bars. The brunette gave her a weak smile. Yeah, sure, whatever you say Sonia, he agreed distractedly. The team left the cafeteria and made their way to their room. Once inside, the blonde instantly put a silencing seal on the door after securing it. So, snake face? She asked instantly, green eyes sharp. The brunette straightened immediately, all signs of illness gone. Contact was made. Confirmed the target. His eyes darted to their raven-haired teammate. Sensei was correct. Snakeface is dangerous. He smirked. But Snakeface is pissed, won't be thinking straight for the next couple of days. I think our ploy will work. His teammate's shoulders sagged with relief. Good, responded the blonde. She sighed. Still, be careful. Snakeface is clever. We can't afford to take chances. The brunette grinned until his teeth were all exposed. Trust me, I got this. His eyes subtly flicked to their raven-haired teammate again. No one messes with Team Kubiko. He looked decidedly dangerous as he said it, and his teammates were both startled and touched by the sheer emotion behind it. Iruka yelped, barely dodging a wadded mixture of paper and glue. He had hoped that all the pranks on his person would cease after his extended B rank. Sadly, it seemed he had underestimated whomever had been devising such nasty traps. It seemed that even something as pivotal as the Chunin exams wouldn't hold back the arsehole causing all these shenanigans. He wouldn't lie, however. It seemed that he wasn't the only poor sap getting caught in the mess, and he was rather smug about it. He'd already heard rumors that Training Ground 44 Tower was receiving annoying prank attacks, as well as the village itself. If Iruka was being honest, he was glad that all the jerks who thought Naruto, and some of his lesser-known students, wasn't that bad and pranking was harmless, were getting tagged relentlessly. He could shove it in their faces that being pranked sucked a lot. That didn't mean he enjoyed suffering any more than his comrades did. Iruka, however, was suitably impressed that someone was managing so much chaos. He had never managed to make such a large swath of victims. No one had ever been so paranoid when he was at the height of his pranking career. Kami helped them, but everyone was paranoid. He'd heard many of his Shunin buddies bemoaning their bad luck when they got hit. He'd even heard snippets of Jounin getting caught up in it too, and it seemed like they were out for blood. Wanted posters for information about the fools responsible were posted everywhere. There was even an impressive reward for anyone with credible info. Iruka didn't know whether he wanted to congratulate the prankster or beat him senseless. After all, the Leaf had never been so alert unless it was wartime. And, if you looked at the twitchy ninja, the tense shoulders, the pinched expressions, and the paranoid eyes constantly on the lookout, you would think a war was still going. Iruka had no doubt that any visiting ninja for the third part of the exams would be blown away by how high-strung and on edge all of the Leaf shinobi were. It would probably make them just as paranoid and hopefully instill some doubt that Leaf had gotten lackadaisical. Several people had already come to Iruka about the whole mess. They demanded to know if Naruto was responsible. Iruka stared at them like they were idiots. Naruto was impressively clever with pranks, but there was no way the solitary blonde could cover so much ground consistently. Iruka was also forced to point out that Naruto had been on an extended mission to Wave while the pranks were still occurring. So basically, there was no evidence that could put the blonde in T&I for questioning. It had upset the crowd that had arrived at the academy demanding answers. They had really hoped it was the blonde because he would, supposedly, be easy to deal with. Iruka had watched them leave and rolled his eyes at their foolishness. Really, Iruka would never rule out Naruto. He wouldn't tell them that, but Naruto had proven he was a downright terror when it came to pranking. But Iruka had told them the truth too. Naruto couldn't do all the recent stuff alone. Even with the Kage Bunshin, Naruto would be extremely hard-pressed to keep up with missions and training, let alone trying to wedge in the sheer amount of well-thought-out pranks. But Iruka couldn't imagine Sasuke or Sakura helping out. That was beyond ridiculous. Really, Iruka didn't rule out Naruto, but he sure as Kami-sama didn't know who else would have the time to team up with him to create such unparalleled messes. Nor did he have a clue who would want to. After all, the wanted posters were not flattering, and sooner or later someone would be caught and be made to suffer. Iruka shuddered, tilting his head to absently dodge a balloon filled with paint. It should also say something that he thought a B-rank was a vacation. "Ack!" shouted a voice in front of him. Iruka paused to blink at Anko, whose face was covered in fluorescent pink paint. She wiped her face as her eyes shot in his direction. Iruka barely had time to put a kunai between himself and the one aimed at his neck. "What in Kami-sama's hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed, a wild look in her dark eyes. Iruka huffed. "It wasn't me. It was aimed at my head. I dodged it." He blushed when he realized that, involuntarily, it was partially his fault. "Sorry." If he remembered right, she often went to the dango shop down the street. "Look, it wasn't me. But, since I was inadvertently responsible, I'll treat you to some dango." Her eyes narrowed a beat and Iruka had to suppress an uneasy swallow. "Ugh." Anko pulled her kunai away. "Fine." She huffed and muttered some curses. "Let's go." She grabbed his arm and started dragging him down the street. "I only have a little while before I have to go check on the fresh meat at 44. "Fresh meat?" he echoed, bemused by the whole situation. He'd never actually met Anko, but she was turning out to be rather similar to the descriptions he heard in passing. Anko abruptly stopped, causing Iruka to bump into her. She whirled on him and he cringed back, though that wasn't very far considering she still had hold of his wrist. "You?" she snarled. Iruka blinked. "Me? You're that academy teacher." She poked him harshly in the chest. He was pretty sure he was going to get bruises from this whole encounter. "One of them, yes." "How did you do it?" she demanded. He stared. "Do what?" "How did you get all those whiny-ass kids to be so competent?" What?" He leaned away as she loomed closer over him. "A rookie 12. She nearly bellowed. "How did you do it? There's never been that many rookie teams in the exams before. And they all got to the tower already." Iruka shifted uneasily. "All of them? All of them?" she hissed. "Worse, they still act like brats." She huffed and threw her free arm in the air. "I don't get it. Ibiki is giving me hell because they all made it. You're the only thing that's different. It's your first gig. This is just impossible." She grabbed his collar and shook him. "What did you do?" "Mama, Anko, you shouldn't be roughing up your fellow leaf ninja," said a bored voice. Anko's head whipped around so fast Iruka was sure he heard a snap. "Kakashi." Anko promptly dumped Iruka on his ass. "Do I get to torture your team after the exams?" she crooned at the silver-haired man. "They are such an amusing bunch of brats." Kakashi smiled. "We'll see. After all, they may just get promoted and be taken off my hands." Anko snorted. "Yeah, right." She squinted at him. "Did Naruto give you any more of those explosive notes he secretly hoards?" Kakashi tilted his head. "Your prey is getting away." He pointed at something over her shoulder. Iruka cursed, having almost been around the building when Kakashi ratted him out. "Bastard." "Hey." Anko leapt towards him. "You owe me dango." Iruka sprinted like a madman, but he only made it 3 blocks before he was trussed up by several snakes. Anko cackled as she stood over him. "Man, you're too easy. Naruto at least makes it across town before I catch him." She grabbed him and threw him over her shoulder. "Let's go." She pointed dramatically before walking jauntily back the way they'd come. "Dango, dango. Everybody's favorite yummo. Dango, dango. Have to have it every day-o." Iruka groaned as Anko kept up the weird sing-song. He'd found an adult female version of Naruto. He didn't need 2 of them. 1 was plenty. "Ooh. Sensei-kun. You have a firm butt," cooed Anko, squeezing Iruka's rear. He squealed and managed to struggle out of her grasp. He landed uncomfortably on his face before rolling around to glare at the woman leering down at him. "That was uncalled for." He shouted. He totally wasn't blushing. He wasn't. "Oh, does little Sensei-kun need a hand?" She reached for him. He managed to pull a kunai and made a swipe at her hand, making her pull back. "Don't touch me." He glared. "I'll cut you," he growled. She blinked at him slowly and then a wide smile split her face. "Oh really? Damn it." Kami-sama hated him. What if Kakashi trains Team 7 like ANBU? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.